Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
Peak Mind, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. How long have you been working on this?
My whole life.
Your whole life?
But the actual book, a couple years.
And the idea of improving all aspects of the way the brain works. Is this something that's always fascinated you?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah. The book isn't necessarily about all aspects, but a very important one that drives a lot of other aspects, which is the brain's attention system.
Yeah, that's a thing a lot of people have a problem with today, right? With phones and distractions and screens and nonsense.
Yeah. But it's always been a problem. So, meaning you can look back to medieval monks and they report, I abandoned my family, I've devoted my life to God, and I still keep thinking about lunch when I'm supposed to be praying. So this is not only a modern problem, it's actually a human problem.
Where does it come from? Is it just a natural function of having a lot of things to think about in the world if you're trying to survive?
Where does what come from?
The
Distractibility?
Distraction. If you think about it, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you kind of have to multitask mentally, right? You can't just concentrate on picking these mushrooms. You also have to think, is that a sound of a branch snapping behind me? Is someone sneaking up on me? What's that smell? You have to always be aware of so many different things. It seems almost like a natural part of being a person to be distracted.
Absolutely. Our brain is built for distractibility exactly for the reasons that you said. It advantages us to be able to not just focus when we want to, but scan as we're still engaged in a task. And it's as I just mentioned, it's not really only a modern problem, because oftentimes, even if we're abandoning every other kind of possible external distraction, and we're just by ourselves alone in a quiet room, we can still feel like it's hard to focus. So this capacity that drives kind of a shifting, moving, attention waxing and waning is something that is baked into the way that our brain functions. And I think that's often misunderstood as a problem. People think, oh, no, my brain is really busy. My brain gets really distracted. Instead of understanding that's just the nature of the brain. If you are alive, awake, conscious, about half of your waking moments, your attention is not going to be in the task at hand.
Yeah, that's something that people need to learn when they start meditating, that when you meditate, people think, God, why do I keep getting distracted? That's just part of it.
Exactly.
You're never going to be completely zen for long periods of time and just completely full of bliss and enlightenment. No, you're going to be thinking about cheese and
lunch,
car tires.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
When is it raining? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think understanding that, it starts to shift your relationship to what you're trying to do in the practice of meditation. Mm-hmm. It's not about clearing the mind, and that term gets used a lot. Just clear it out. Not possible. Not going to happen. Not the way that your brain was designed. But then you start understanding that there is a win to be had in a practice, especially the kind of stuff that I study in my lab, mindfulness meditation, because in the act of knowing where your mind is and training it to come back over and over, you gain a lot. You gain almost, in some sense, the super capacity to have more control in your, not just the way your mind functions, but in your life.
That's where it gets interesting for me, because do you have sort of a standard protocol that you think people should apply to their thinking, or is it based on where you are in your life, how much you've already done of this? Does everybody's brain vary in terms of how much distractions they have in their head?
Deep question, actually. So, yes, it varies, and let's just say the basics are there's a basic profile. So to disabuse ourselves that if your mind wanders, there's something wrong with you or there's something unique about you. That's everybody. But it is the case that for some people, not some people, in every group we've studied in my lab, and this is many, many kinds of groups. So from active duty military to first responders to students to athletes, leaders in organizations, teachers, just goes on and on. If you are experiencing a protracted period of high demand meaning you got to get something done. Like for students, it'd be during the academic semester, or for athletes, even pre-season training. If you're experiencing that kind of high demand for multiple weeks, your attention is going to decline. Your attentional functioning is going to decline. Your distractibility, or mind wandering would be the technical way to describe it, is going to increase. So that's one thing we need to know, no matter what your sort of set point is. And we do have different set points as individual differences.
Now, when it comes to your own mind, when you're working with these different groups of people and you're putting together this book and you're putting together these sort of methods and strategies for taking care of just the weirdness of being a person and the weirdness of the mind.
Yeah.
Are you gaining something out of this personally by going through all this? Like, is this helping you as well while you're writing all this stuff down, while you're, exposing these various techniques that can improve your concentration and your ability to focus on things? Do you find that it's helping you as well?
Well,
or is this something that you've always worked on?
Oh, no, it's not. I mean, I've been a neuroscientist for a long time. I've been interested in the way the brain works for a long time. I started studying attention as an undergrad and went on to do my, graduate work and postdoctoral training, and then set up a lab to study attention. And then kind of early in my time of being a professor, I had like this kind of acute crisis of attention. And it was around the time I'd just had my first child and my husband was in grad school, setting up the lab. I lost feeling in my teeth from grinding.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And then I remember one night I was sitting there with my then almost 3-year-old, reading a book to him. And like, this is important to me. I mean, this is like the only time I really have with him that's supposed to be quality time. Feeling like this is a time I'm supposed to really be here for him. Reading a book, and he asked me a question, put a little hand on the book, asked me a question. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I'm like, I am definitely not here. I am not even here when I want to be. This is what I want to do. I'm not in the middle of doing anything else, but my mind is not here. And it was scary. It was like, oh, this is not cool. And then I'm like, I study this stuff. Okay, just let's go see the literature. How can I find a solution? I can't access my own attention. It's slipping through my fingers. So I literally did. I'm like, I'm going to study everything I can. Nothing. I came up empty. And that was also troubling. Like, what do you mean? There's nothing I can go to in the literature that's just like, here's the best way to train your attention so that you have better access to your moment-to-moment lived experience. Kind of empty. And then just to kind of continue the journey, I'm like, there's got to be something to do. And at that moment, it was not just feeling distracted. It was starting to feel kind of depressed and a little bit anxious too, like sort of this bubbling up of my life is slipping away from me. And at that moment, it was sort of funny how serendipity happens. But a dear colleague of mine, an eminent neuroscientist who happens to be an emotion researcher, an affective neuroscientist, at that time was at the University of Pennsylvania. He was giving a lecture. So, just as part of my colloquium, I went to this lecture, and I'm sitting at the back of the room. He goes through this whole talk. He ends his talk by showing kind of 2 brain images. One is of a brain induced to be in a very negative mood. I mean, usually you do this by putting people in the scanner and saying, think of your worst memories, like feel bad. You play sad music. And then he did the same thing on the other side where he showed a brain image of a person induced to be in a positive mood. And he's just trying to make the point that these are distinct brain states. We can track them. They have different functions. But, of course, given my own life circumstances, at the end of the lecture, I kind of shout out from the back of the room, like, how do you make that brain look like that brain? I just wanted an answer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he was rushed because it was the end of the lecture or what, but he just kind of calls out, like not even in the microphone, I don't even remember, meditation. And I'm like, what the heck is, do you know where you are? You don't say that. This is in the early 2000s. Meditation was not a thing. We don't talk about it. To me, it was almost as offensive as like talking about astrology to physicists or something. Like,
was it really?
It was absolutely not something I had ever heard
amongst
of
academics
in an
neuroscience.
academic neuroscience context.
Really? I did not know that. So when did it start becoming something that was taken seriously?
Is it now?
Yeah, I think meditation's being
No, absolutely. And I would say a lot of the effort that I've been up to, now we have a field, contemplative neuroscience. So anyway, so yeah, we're definitely there. I would say over the last 15 years, there's been a serious uptick in the seriousness taken. And a lot of it is because of these kind of brain imaging studies where we could put people in scanners and we could track them, and a lot of the work that we've been doing as well. But it really bugged me that he said that. And I was still very much a skeptic. Like, I don't know.
Of meditation?
Of just, yeah. And I had a chance to talk to him afterwards. He's now become a very sort of dear, more closer colleague, and he runs an entire center that's tied to contemplative practice. But at that point, it was almost like he was also kind of closeted. He had not come out. He was doing some of the initial studies.
He was closeted with meditation?
Well, yeah, because he was just starting to do studies. Again, it was a liability. And just to fast forward a little bit.
Really? Meditation was a liability to discuss in academic circles?
When I told my colleagues that and it was a big deal because I'm like a traditional hard-nosed academic studying attention. I said, I'm going to make this like tiny pivot to studying training attention. And I'm going to use this thing called mindfulness, meditation. First it was like silence, like you're committing career suicide, but you're going to do what you're going to do.
People actually said that to you?
Oh, yeah.
That's so strange.
I mean, I love that you're saying it's so strange because in some sense, it is the success of this enterprise and the rigor with which we've been able to do a lot of research that has caused a type of culture change, which is a pretty rapid pace of causing that culture change. But for me, when I heard the term, we can see I'm an Indian woman. I, of course, knew about meditation. My earliest memories are seeing my dad meditating. And I always thought, that's great, that's great for them, but I'm like a serious Western-trained scientist, and until there's any reason to really think this is a helpful thing, I'm not going to do it. But going back to your question, which was about my personal journey with this practice as it relates to writing the book and the work that we're doing. I started practicing. I went to the Penn bookstore after he said that term with my own resistance in hand and found a little book called Meditation for Beginners. I lucked out because I picked a really good book by a really influential person. I didn't know anything about this. Jack Kornfield. It's called Meditation for Beginners. It came with a little guided CD. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give this a try. And as I started doing it, I had a lot of like light bulb moments. Like, how does this guy know what's happening in my mind? How does he know that I'm now resisting or my mind is wandering or, but the instruction was very clearly about attention. So it's almost like I know this world. I've never seen anybody talk about it from the direct phenomenology of the attention system. So I shifted into practicing and then like waking up to the benefits and then had that pivotal moment where I'm like, I think I'm going to study this.
So is it fair to say that traditional academics study the brain states and study these various phenomena like lack of attention or hyperattention, but they don't study how to achieve them? They don't study the various things that can be done, which is Jack Kornfield, is that his name? Kornfeld?
Jack Kornfield. He's
Duncan Trussell's a giant fan of that
yeah,
guy,
yeah.
right?
And his Jack's wife, Trudy, is on Duncan's show.
Oh, is she?
So often, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, no, I would say it's shifting. The landscape is shifting. But from my personal experience, remember if you just not remember, but if you think back to the history of science, we as a field, as a scientific enterprise, started moving away from subjective to objective. Mm-hmm. And when you're going to be objective about something, it's not about your experience with it. It's about what you can look at it through measures that have nothing to do with you.
But that's where it gets weird, because if you're talking about science and you're talking about the mind, there's no way to separate you from the mind. Like what you do directly influences the way the mind works. So if we're studying the way the mind works, but we're not studying what you do, we're just studying these random states with no understanding of how they got there until meditation's being really explored. Is that fair to say?
No, I would say we do a lot that...
I mean now. I mean like the way you used to when you were saying that you were committing academic suicide by studying meditation. Is that the way they used to look at it?
Even in my own professional life, we would design tasks that tapped into attention, things that made people pay attention to things, sort of like video games. And then we'd look at the brain responses. We'd understand the way attention is instantiated within our brain. But it was not about my own phenomenological experience with my attention and how does it feel and what gets in the way and what distracts me. Some of that was covered in the kind of clinical realm, like, oh yeah, you ruminate or you've got unfortunate psychological challenges. You're depressed. That's why you're not able to focus. But these were not worlds that were merging, and a serious look at people training their own minds in this way to result in objective metrics that we could change was certainly not being done, which is why I couldn't find anything in the literature. So yes, the journey of the introduction of contemplative practice into science is very, very new. I mean, it had a little bit of a resurgence, or not resurgence, but introduction in the 70s. And then it really started again with tools like brain imaging, where, in some sense you could be objective. You put somebody in the scanner and say, okay, Joe, I want you to do a quick meditation practice for 10 minutes, and I'd look to see what your brain activity looked like.
And what kind of scans are you using? Is it fMRI?
We use a whole bunch of stuff in my lab. Most of the work that I've been doing over the last 10 years or so, because I'm going to military bases and various off-site locations, we don't bring a scanner with us. We just have them do attention tasks to see if things like mindfulness training have an impact. So just to answer the question you asked, it was the case that my personal journey woke me up to a whole new scientific endeavor, which is what made me want to bring it to the lab. And I happen to have all these tools from sort of traditional psychology and cognitive neuroscience to apply to this new space of mindfulness meditation.
So when you get to this book, Meditation for Beginners,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Like what?
Yeah. A lot of the same stuff that actually we continue to do with all these groups, including what the kinds of practices that I give. These are not brand new practices. These are from the millennia-old wisdom traditions, right? In particular with Jack, the Buddhist tradition. So a foundational practice that he offered was mindfulness of the breath. And he was very clear on what mindfulness in that sense meant. It's about taking this sort of present-centered attention without editorializing or reacting to it, kind of getting the raw data of the experience. And so he guided the participant, and it was actually a recording of a retreat he was leading. So it's just like he's talking to these people that are, who knows how long, maybe a month-long retreat. And he's like, you're sitting quietly, you're focusing on, just notice your body breathing. And notice what's prominent. So it might be coolness of air, whatever it is for you. That's where you should be guiding your attention to stay there. And then the next aspect of the instruction was, when you notice your mind wanders away from that, bring it back. Repeat. And, he would use these phrases like, as minds do. It'll wander away as minds do. Or you may find yourself resisting, or you may find yourself in a fantasy. But the instruction was always the same. Regardless of where you were, gently bring your attention back. And so I started realizing, oh my goodness, he's giving us like this workout for attention. And given what I knew about the brain systems of attention, my strong hunch was he's actually tapping into all the main brain systems of attention that exist. And so now I want to check out, let's bring it to the lab, let's give it to people that aren't me, and let's see, does attention actually change with our objective measures of these systems?
And what did you get out of it?
That's the book.
So like when you're in the lab, was there anything shocking that you learned from seeing how these practices and how mindfulness applied, like what it did to the brain?
So yes, I mean, and I want to go back to something you said that's tied to what shocked me, which is not something extraordinary. It's just the fact that there was any effect at all. So you were asking me, is the field of psychology not care about changing the brain or training the brain? Absolutely it cares. But the approaches taken were like brain training games or stimulating the brain or light and sound devices, or maybe put somebody in a good mood and that'll change their attention. So we had tried all those in the lab.
When you say stimulating the brain, do you mean with
transcranial magnetic stimulation?
That stuff's fascinating.
It's all fascinating.
I was listening to a Radio Lab podcast where they were discussing this sniper training course. Do you know the course I'm talking about?
No.
It's like a video game where you are in sort of a virtual reality scenario where you are, if I'm remembering it correctly, there's like bad guys and hostages, and you're supposed to shoot the bad guys, not the hostages. And this woman went through this and was fairly slow, and the thing is like 20 minutes. And she did it, and it was like she wasn't very good at it, and she screwed it up. And then they went through this transcranial, what is it, magnets that they're using? And it's some electrical, I think it's called 9-volt Nirvana. I think that's the episode of the...
Okay.
There it is, 9-volt Nirvana. So they put these magnets on her, and then she goes through it flawlessly. She does the whole thing, and it ends, and she's like, I thought it was like 5 minutes. And it turns out it was 20 minutes. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, what happened? And then they look at her score, like, Jesus Christ, you have a perfect score. Like, she went from being terrible at it to being like an expert with this brain stimulation. And the entire episode is about all these different people that have developed these like personal hacking devices to do this transdermal stimulation. That's what it's called.
Yeah, it's like repetitive, direct transcranial magnetic stimulation, brain zapping. Yeah, I mean,
how does that work?
Well, that's not my expertise, but I'll just tell you that it's fascinating to see that, yes, activating and inhibiting certain parts of the brain, and basically you're limited because you got to get through the skull,
right? And
then you got to be able to. It'll be just a few centimeters, but if you can place it right, or you have multiple coils, you might be able to target different regions. There's a lot of positive stuff happening with that now, but just to take you back to where I was, the kind of things that were happening back in the early 2000s, there was not a lot of benefit that we could see over and over again. So maybe in the acute moment, like you zap your brain and something looks different, was great. But what about 8 weeks later?
Right.
What about even 2 days later? So the brain zapping, the actual stimulation stuff, very fruitful enterprise.
In the moment.
Well, in the moment for sure, but also other people are learning. Maybe there's a way you can stimulate repeatedly and get a benefit. But sort of separate from that, the main thing that was happening at the time I was starting to think about pursuing mindfulness training was brain training games.
So what are these games?
So these are kind of like simple video games, attentionally demanding. There's many companies out there that were offering them. Now we could do them on our phone. They were like the experiments we were doing to evaluate attention, except you do them over and over again. The levels would get higher, and people would get better and better at doing them. And then you'd give them you'd have them do this for some period of time, and then you'd change the way the game worked. You'd change the superficial stimuli, or maybe you'd change the demand, or you'd have them do something real world that you think is tied to attention and working memory, and there was no benefit. There was no transfer. So that made the field really take a look at, okay, the brain is smart. It will get better at that specific thing, but it's not resulting in a generalizable benefit to attention so that you can use it no matter what you're doing. So your question was such a good one, which was, what surprised you? So I'm sitting by myself in my office, struggling with not being able to feel my teeth, decide to get this book, start practicing. All of a sudden, my own embodied experience of my life starts shifting. I'm more present with my family. I'm realizing I have more of my attention back. And so I decided to pursue this line of research where we offer the program, a mindfulness training program, and there were several available already in the medical context. And I said the test is going to be those same kind of tests that we use to understand attention. It might be remember faces and scenes, or remember numbers and then try to do math problems, or whatever it is, complex stimuli. Does it transfer? Because nothing else was transferring. So you sit quietly focusing on your breath, then you come into the lab and do these rigorous tests of attention, and we saw benefits on those tests. We saw transfer. And that to me was very, very exciting, because it was like you're not practicing with numbers and stimuli on the screen. You're just sitting there with your eyes closed by yourself. You're doing this workout, and all of a sudden it transfers. So it really opened up this possibility that we could add to a suite of things like the Radiolab episode you were talking to, that people can do on their own every day as a mental workout to advantage their attention, especially for people that are likely to have their attention degraded because high stress tends to degrade attention.
And when you're saying it transfers, like how are you measuring this? Like,
You're
and
just-
what are the results?
The results are, so let me give you an example of one of the kinds of experiments. It's a really basic attention task, and it's something called the sustained attention response task. What we're trying to do in that task is we're trying to see how people can stay on task and resist their own internal distractibility, right? So their mind will wander, and they have to keep themselves on this task, really boring on purpose to do that. So you sit in front of a computer screen, you're going to see a number show up every half second or so, about every quarter of a second. Press a button every time you see a digit on the screen, except when that digit is 3. In those cases, just withhold. And people do this, and we find that people have a terrible time doing this because the 3 only happens like 5% of the time. So you can imagine you're sitting there, you're like, press, press, press. The 3 appears, and you're like, oh, shoot, I pressed. And when we give this to Marines, they kind of freak out. They're like, just damn 3s, like they really freak out. And they're like, why can't I just do this? Because the mind gets distracted, and it's hard to pay attention. So that task we knew had really good traction in the lab. We could get people to do it. We knew what the brain components were of the experiment itself. And so now we give that experiment to people. They come in, we give it to them, then they go through a multi-week mindfulness training program, and we give it to them again. And what we see is if there's any change in their performance, it's a very stable task. If you give it to people over and over again, usually, no change. And this time we saw an improvement in that task performance. They were not pressing to the 3 more often, meaning they weren't making mistakes, and they were less variable. So they were really just there more often to be able to do the task. That's just a very simple example, but there's many other, we've done many kinds of experiments where we look at these core attentional functions and find improvements. And, it's so funny that you mentioned this VR environment from the radio lab episode, because now we're doing that. We're saying we're actually working with soldiers and, mostly active duty military, and looking at combat scenarios with these kind of virtual reality environments, immersive environments, and we're seeing how their performance might change for those when they go through a mindfulness training program. That's a project we're just in the middle of right now.
When you're saying that this, I definitely want to talk about that, but when you're saying that the ability to not hit the number 3 and that you saw a measured improvement, like how much of an improvement?
10%.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, 10% when we were looking at people that were practicing a lot. So the first study we did was, we had no, I mean, just kind of take you back in time. Now you'd say, oh, isn't meditation good for your brain? We had no idea. This was a total shot in the dark. So I was like, if there's ever going to be an effect, I need to go where people are just gung-ho meditating a lot. Because if the signal is tiny and I don't pick it up, I will conclude that it doesn't work. So let's give it the best shot of working. So I ended up partnering with a retreat center in Colorado where people were doing mindfulness meditation practices 10 to 12 hours a day.
Oh, Jesus.
And that was our first, I was like, I got to advantage us. Like, it was going to, and when we saw it, that's where we saw it. And then we brought it back to the lab and looked at medical and nursing students and gave them a more kind of regular mindfulness training program that's about 8 weeks long, and they're practicing about 45 minutes a day. And we saw benefits there too. So then that's been the progression of my career, has been to try to figure out time-efficient solutions for people, because most people can't get away for a month to meditate.
Now, when you're working with these soldiers, did you have a control group?
Yeah.
So, because I would imagine that if they get frustrated, they keep hitting the 3, they're going to go, okay, get your shit together. Stop hitting the 3. Calm yourself down, figure it out. Did anyone improve without the mindfulness meditation?
There's always variability. You know how research goes, right? So
how many people are you working with?
I mean, now we've had hundreds of people.
At the time, like when you're running these tests with soldiers?
I mean, this result we see over and over again. But yeah, of course, some people will just get better at it because they've strategized.
Did anybody get to the same level of 10% without mindfulness training?
No. But there's another thing I got to tell you, which is it goes back to what I was saying happens under high stress. Because, my whole reason for – so just to kind of backtrack. So why am I working with soldiers all of a sudden? Mm-hmm. It was like one of the things that we knew from my lab is attention is extremely powerful. And we can talk about what it actually is because we're kind of using it as like a placeholder. It's actually a pretty deep interesting topic to think about what it actually is. It's not just focus. Anyway, we know how it works, but we also were learning that it's extremely vulnerable. And so even in the laboratory context, even with a simple task like the one I was just describing to you, what you do is you take kind of that simple digits task, and I put in a negative image every now and then, people start falling apart even more. It's just...
What do you mean by putting a negative?
So you're sitting there, you see number. You see a 3, you're going to screw up. You're going to press it often. And then I just added this element of, I'm going to put in negative or neutral images every now and then, pictures from the news. So all of a sudden, you're doing this task and you see like some very disturbing image. And then you got to go back to doing the numbers thing. Or you see a neutral image, complex scene. Just doing that small manipulation, adding those things, and performance got worse. And so we knew we were starting to get this profile of attention is very powerful. It can really impact things, but things like negative images, negative mood, stressful circumstances, threatening circumstances further deplete attention. So, and I was experiencing that, right? I was like, I wasn't in a life or death threat situation, but I was now definitely looking back on it, feeling a little overwhelmed with all that life required. So I became very interested in for me, it wasn't consequential. Okay, so I didn't read the book to my kid. Nothing happened. Everybody was okay. For many groups, many professions, it's not just that their attention matters. It's that the circumstances that we ask them to perform at their best professionally are the ones that are going to disadvantage and degrade their attention. And that was a whole category of people, military service members, emergency services professionals, first responders. Attention is life or death. You can't lapse. You can't shoot when you shouldn't be shooting. So anyway, that's why I started working with these groups. So you're asking me if people actually anybody got better over time. For the most part, for the control group, when we did nothing at all, over a 4 to 8 week interval, usually we picked these intervals that were just preparatory, high-stress pre-deployment training. They're getting ready to go to be deployed. Everybody as a group got worse. So the baseline performance for the military folks and other high-stress groups enduring high-stress intervals was degradation. If you gave the same task to a civilian or even that same kind of person during normal life, they were stable. So the baseline was degradation. When we gave them mindfulness training, the training group, they were stable over time. They did not degrade.
Even with the negative images and all the other things you were doing.
Well, now we didn't need to put negative images anymore because the circumstances were simulated. I mean, they were descriptive of high stress, high threat, negative mood. That was their life. So we didn't have to experimentally look at that anymore. We gave very basic, just numbers, digits. And everybody got worse as a group. This is now, we're not just talking about military service members. We saw this with football players during preseason training, undergrads, if you probably business people that are going through sales season. I mean, anything that is, you didn't think of your own life, like anything that is high demand and long, it's going to degrade your attention.
Yeah, there's things that we know. I was thinking about this the other day because I was counting some money. And I was thinking, and I was by myself, but I was thinking how frustrating it is when you're counting money if someone starts throwing numbers at you. Yes. I don't know why I was thinking that while I was counting money, right?
That probably distracted you too.
Kind of, it did a little bit, but I was thinking God, how weird is it that it's so difficult to just simple numbers? Like if you've got $20 bills, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, you're piling these $100 bills or $20 bills in the $100 stacks. But if someone comes along and goes 50, 80, 90, 70, fuck, man, stop doing that. That really works. It works on everybody. But it's so strange, that little external, just something that interferes with your rhythm of counting numbers.
Yeah. I mean, now you're tapping into a classic working memory experiment.
Because it's not stressful at all.
It's not.
Counting $20 bills is not stressful. But if someone comes over and goes 90, 110, 120, 45, 60, yeah, what the fuck, man? Even if there's no stress on you. If it's not a competition or anything, it's just, you're trying to count $500 and you can't do it because someone's yelling out numbers. I'm like, God, how shitty are brains?
Exactly. But you're what you're doing is like when you're counting, you're putting it into something called our temporary scratch space working memory. And like you're actually saying it to yourself. And that same space is where new perceptual information goes in and it's messing you up.
Temporary scratch space working memory. That's what it is?
Yeah.
What is the terminology? What is it supposed to...
So working memory, I like to think of it as it's not really about the memory part. It's about the working part. So we've been talking about attention so far. Take attention and think about it over time. So like in our conversation right now, you're using your working memory. I'm saying stuff, you're comprehending it. You're probably having a thought, but you're a nice person and you're not going to just blurt it out. You're going to probably hold it till you see a nice spot. You just use your working memory. It really is this temporary holding pad. I sometimes talk about it as like a whiteboard in your mind, but with disappearing ink. It has this very short time frame, maybe 30 to 60 seconds max. So as you're experiencing information, as you're paying attention to it, you write it on the whiteboard. So you're doing this counting task. You're counting your $1 million bills or whatever it was. And the numbers are going up on the whiteboard. And then somebody else says 90, 50. Those are also going up on the whiteboard. So now you're like, wait, what's the stuff happening there?
So your brain puts things into like a little area where I just need to know this for now. And then eventually it's like, I'll be done counting and then you're not going to remember any of it.
You don't want to.
Right.
It's like the cache in your computer. Like it's just a temporary scratch space. And it's so important. If you don't have that, you're out of luck. You use it for everything. Decision making, thinking, planning. Right now you're using it.
Yeah. It's very odd, though, that there's so many different kinds of memory. And that there's memories that are like cemented in your head, like really important personal milestones or, loving memories or traumatic memories. But then there's other memories that are just like you ask someone their name and then you immediately forget it.
Exactly.
Like,
it didn't get on the whiteboard.
Right.
Or vanish before you could rewrite it. Like
that's a weird one. The name one is weird.
Yeah. So what do you do if you meet somebody and you're like, I got to remember this person's name? What do you typically do?
I ask again.
Exactly.
I say I forgot your name.
Exactly. You ask again.
I have too much on my brain to be dishonest. So if I forget someone's name, I'd say, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. But I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just being... And if you're a mature adult human being with a life... Like you know that you do that occasionally. You're like, Fred? No, Bob. Sorry, Bob. Fuck, sorry.
Yeah.
It's not rude. It's just a mistake. It's like a thing that people do.
So Amishi, just to refresh your memory.
Yes. You have a very memorable name. It's a beautiful name, by the way.
Thank you. So, here's the thing. Now, that's inconsequential. Like, you're right. You could just make up. You got great social intelligence. You'll be fine. But now let's say it is consequential. There's like 4 servers and somebody you just dealt with is dealing with correcting the order you just made. And you got to remember their name or something about them. Mm-hmm. And you got to keep it in mind. You cannot let it go because you will suffer because of it.
Right.
So now let's say you're trying to remember, but you're not going to remember this person forever. What might you do to like try to keep that in mind? Usually you rehearse. You kind of visualize the image or you kind of say it to yourself over and over again.
But then you're not listening to what they're saying because you're just trying to remember Amishi.
Exactly. And it's the same scratch space. It's the same scratch space. So it ends up working memory is another thing that we test in my lab. And working memory also significantly declines over high stress intervals.
Yeah, for sure, right?
And working memory is something, you mentioned there's all these kinds of memories. But working memory, it takes from perception and attention as its inputs. It's what writes it on the board. But also you can call it up from long-term memory. So if I say, Joe, what did you have for breakfast this morning? You don't have to tell me, but you could do it, right?
Okay, yes, I could.
So what did you just do? Essentially, you have a long-term representation, or you don't. Let's say you do remember. Mm-hmm. You call it up. It gets written on the whiteboard. And now you use your attention to kind of read what's on the right whiteboard and say, oh, I had a shake or whatever it was. So it's used for both the input of information and the extraction from our long-term memory. Very, very powerful brain system tied to intelligence, tied to decision-making, emotion regulation, everything. And it starts tanking under high stress.
Did you run any experiments using nootropics or using various compounds that are thought to enhance memory?
I did not.
You did not? Interesting.
So, and I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, and I would say it's not my expertise, but I think that what's very interesting about going back to mindfulness training is that it really is establishing not just the kind of core strength, but a specific set of processes. So remember back, let me just unpack that. So like even what we were saying about that, those simple set of practices like the breath awareness practice that Jack's CD had on it. What is that actually training me to do? And I said, when we were talking about that, I said, it's actually training all these systems of attention. I'd love to tell you like a little bit about the systems of attention because my hunch is, and I think those studies with kind of different substances, they can be beneficial. But just like, I think about you and your martial MMA expertise, and like there's going to be core strength you're going to need. But then there's certain moves you got to practice over and over again to be able to use them in that particular context. And just being strong or agile in general is not going to be helpful. There's like a certain kind of move that you need to make. And that's what I think the suite of mindfulness practices is offering. It's training attention in a particular way. So anyway, so I think that other substances can be great. That's not my expertise, but it's really regarding what are the vulnerabilities? Why does attention start tanking under stress, threat, and poor mood? And why does it seem like mindfulness training is actually able to protect against that? It requires us to get an understanding of what the heck attention actually is.
I'm glad you used the analogy of martial arts because I think with that analogy, you could also apply the idea of nootropics, because in martial arts, you do have techniques that need to be drilled and worked on over and over again, but those techniques become more effective with a body that performs better.
Yeah.
And when you supplement with vitamins and, you make sure that you have a satisfying input in terms of like protein and carbohydrates and all the things that you need for your body to perform, where your body's not at a deficit, it performs better. And then there's also supplements that you can take that will increase athletic performance and enhance recovery. And those things will also allow you to put in more time in training, which would then yield better results. The way I look at nootropics is the same way. There's certainly not a substitute for mindfulness training or for concentration or for breath work or any of those things. But I think that things like acetylcholine and the various nootropics that have been shown to increase memory, that I do think they play a part. I first found out about them back in the early 2000s. There was a radio show that I was on in San Francisco, and one of the hosts had this thing called Neuro One, and it was a product that was developed by Bill Romanowski. He was a football player, and he was having memory issues. Football players should take a lot of hits to the head. And so he developed this nootropic, and I had never heard what a nootropic was. I was like, what is it? And he's like, just try it. Sarah No Name, shout out to them. And this guy who was on the show who was taking it gave it to me, and I was like, whoa, this gives you like a weird sort of like alertness. It wasn't like speedy, like too much caffeine, but it was like I certainly felt like my brain flowed a little bit better. And then I started getting really interested, and there's a bunch of really good ones out there. And we have some of this gum. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. I'll give you some before you leave. It's called Neuro Gum. I like that stuff a lot. And then there's a product that we developed, my company on it developed, called Alpha Brain. And what we did is it's a combination of all the various nootropics that we found to be beneficial, and we tried to tweak it over a period of time. But those things help. Like nootropics can definitely. We did 2 placebo-controlled studies at the Boston Center for Memory, and we found increase in verbal memory, increase in peak alpha flow state, reaction time. These things like can be enhanced through supplementation in a way that you can measure. So I think
that's
it's like,
awesome. Yeah,
that on top of meditation and mindfulness. Like we're trying to achieve peak states, right?
Exactly.
That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's definitely not. Everything you're saying sounds amazing, and I think people should advantage themselves and do what they want to do to do that. So this is not a either or. It's a potentially like an and also. No,
but I want you to try because you're a neuroscientist. I'm like when I talk to someone like yourself, I'm like, I want you to try this and tell me what you think.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely try it.
What we have here, we have Alpha Brain here too, right? We have some of that. There we go. Well, we have the gum. I want you to try the gum because the gum is great. We don't have. By the way, this is not my company. I don't have anything to do with the gum. It's just something we use.
Yeah.
But it's great stuff because it tastes like regular gum, but it gives you like this little boost. Got a tiny amount of caffeine in it, and what's the other? Yeah, theanine, right? Yeah. Yeah. This is it.
I'm not going to start chewing it now, but I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, I eat that stuff. I chew it all day long.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of neat thing about where we're at right now in this moment, that there are, just like you mentioned, like the transcranial magnetic stimulation and substances that we can take that will enhance us. And it was so interesting when I was just starting out this stuff, and I remember I was like really trying to figure out, not only for people that are have attentional challenges because they're under a lot of stress, right? Are you going to take some now? The quality of our conversation is just going to
I think it
even
should.
deepen.
I feel dumb today. I had a rigorous workout. Sometimes I come off a hard workout. I feel dumb.
Oh man, now I'm in for it.
We'll see. I might stay dumb.
Well, it's pretty good for dumb.
Oh.
But what I was saying is, like, I was also interested in people that have dispositional attentional challenges, like ADHD, for example.
What is that? Is that real?
ADHD?
100%?
Attention functions on a continuum.
Right.
So, I mean, I'd love to tell you about it. Let me tell you about attention, because that kind of make me feel like at least we'll be on the same page then as it relates to what I'm talking about. Because even the mindfulness stuff is related to attention. So attention, usually, in the way we've been talking about it as focus, right? So what does that mean to you? Right now, you're laser focused on me. You've got awesome attention. At least it looks that way. Focusing on me. Everything else is kind of fuzzed out. And that we call the brain's orienting system. So I think of it like a flashlight. So wherever it is that you direct your attention in that way, you're privileging that content. So right now you're seeing my face with more granularity, hearing my voice with the crispness more than the air conditioner or whatever Jamie might be saying. Like right now you're focused in on me. Thank you very much. So that actually does neurally look like it enhances the sensory input. If you focus in on my voice, your neurons as early as your auditory cortex, within a few hundred milliseconds, you're going to have a clearer comprehension, but even just auditory input is going to be amplified as a function of paying attention. And, just like literally a flashlight, if you're in a darkened space, you value that thing. Wherever it is that it points, it actually gives you that privileged information. The cool thing about the flashlight is you can direct it willfully. You can point it. You can also not just direct it to the external environment. I can say, like, right now, Joe, like, what's the sensations on the bottoms of your feet? Can you sense into that? Were you thinking about it before I said it?
No, I wasn't.
Flashlight got directed to internal bodily sensations. You can pick that up. So it actually goes to one of the reasons attention even evolved in our brain. We talked about the evolution of distractibility, which was to advantage our survival. But why do we have attention in the first place? Why do we even develop this capacity to focus? And it comes down to the brain had a big problem, which is that there's far more information in the environment than it could possibly process. So it's got a subsample. It's got to get bits and pieces of what's going on, and attention, just like the flashlight. If you were in a darkened room and you kind of figure out the landscape, you kind of scan it and kind of put together the image. Same idea with attention, focus, very important. We can talk about this, but I actually want to tell you about the other two main systems. But just keep in mind that not only can we direct the flashlight, but it can get yanked. So if you're in a darkened room and you hear a weird sound, you're going to point to wherever the sound came from. So that's the double-edged sword of this system, is that it's not just about where it goes. Again, very good reasons that we evolved to have that.
Have you ever done any personal experimentation with sensory deprivation tanks?
Oh, I definitely want to talk to you about that. And actually, I think that I have not. I want to.
Ooh, you have to.
I want to. I just haven't had a chance to go. So I definitely want to. But it actually perfect segue into the second system of attention, which is the exact opposite of this narrowing and privileging. And the second big system of attention, I use the metaphor of like a floodlight. It's called the alerting system. The floodlight, unlike the flashlight's narrow, privileging some information over the other, floodlight, broad, receptive, no privileging of any information, allows whatever comes up to come up. The only thing that's privileging is the now. Like what's important right now. And I was, when I'm driving, I think about this often. You see a flashing yellow light, probably near a construction site or near a school maybe. What does that mean? Pay attention. But it's not like that narrow focus attention, like broad, receptive, something weird may happen, be ready for it. So this is, like I said, it's this system is so important and probably, and not just probably, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that suggests in things like sensory deprivation, you now are challenging that system because what is happening is not necessarily from the external environment. So whatever is the baseline existence within the internal milieu may actually be more salient to you because just like the flashlight where you can direct it internally, externally, or internally, the floodlight you can also direct externally and internally. So in the absence of sensory input, you're kind of in this receptive state where everything that's occurring internally, there's an acute and rich awareness of that. Was that matched with your experience?
Yeah, the tank is fascinating because it's really the only environment where you can achieve almost no input from the body.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Because of the warm water that's the same
weightless
temperature as your skin and the amount of Epsom salts in it that make you float. You get to this place where you can't tell the difference between the water and the air, and you're just gone. And you can move a little bit, so there is some input. You know, you can feel, like if you move your head, you'll feel the water in your ears and stuff like that, and you can move your digits. But the reality of that environment is that when you are completely still and just breathing, it's as close to eliminating all external sensory input as possible. And you don't achieve that state anywhere else on Earth.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. So my experience is that any meditation or any mindfulness training inside the tank is significantly more impactful, much more, because you really can get to these very bizarre states, like especially breath work, concentrating on breathing. You get to these like really weird, almost psychedelic states, without any substances at all, just from the absence of sensory input, and you're allowing your brain to be free of traditional restraints, and constraints.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting because, I mean, I definitely want to still tell you about the third system of attention. Keep it in my working memory. But
what is this, the scratch? What is it called again?
It's working memory. But before I do that, I want to say something to you. And I really hope I want to kind of set this up so we can talk about it and have it together to talk about. But one really cool thing about that we know regarding another thing that I think we should talk about, which is mind wandering. So basically the thing we started out talking about, spontaneous initiation of thought. So there's a study I was reading which basically said if you want to, in the context of creativity, increase productive, novel thought, then you need to be basically in this kind of alerting, the floodlight needs to be on for the generation and acceptance of the thought that comes up. And they specifically mentioned that sensory deprivation chambers may be a really great place to get that generative content coming up. You basically have more spontaneous thought in those contexts. Yeah,
I had, I never set it up, but I bought one of those tape recorders that operates on voice activated. And I bought my plan was like to Velcro it to the wall, but I never wound up doing it. But it's probably a good idea because there are times where you come up with these ideas, you're like, oh my God, I got to write this one down, but I don't want to climb out of the tank.
Oh, definitely do that. I mean, it's like one of these self-experimentation things, but I was struck by that, especially anticipating coming to see you, and I know that that's something that you've done. But I think let's keep it in mind as we talk about mindfulness training, because I think the way you're describing mindfulness, I probably have a different view of what it is, and it might actually connect with what we're talking about with creativity. Anyway, so you got flashlight, floodlight, and then the third system is we call it executive control. It's tied to this notion of the whiteboard and working memory. It's essentially the manager. It's like, just like the flashlight is selecting based on content, right side or left side. The floodlight is selecting based on time, what's important right now. This system is selecting information because the whole goal of attention is to subsample reality. You just have different slices. Is that making sense? Mm-hmm. The third system, executive control, is subsampling based on your goals. So what is most goal relevant right now? That should guide the way that I perceive and act. So this system's job, and the term executive is like the way we talk about executives of a company. The executive's job is not to go in and do every single task, but it's to ensure that the goals of the organization and the behavior of the organization align. And then when it's a mess up, the executive says, no, fix that. So this is where things like maintaining the goal, working memory, that's where we put our goals, we maintain them. Inhibiting irrelevant information. It's like, no, you don't need to go think about that right now, right? Like even in the context of a sensory deprivation tank, it's like, yeah, that's great. I probably should remember that, but I can't not experience this right now. It's like goal was experience sensory deprivation, not go write something. So inhibit urges we might have or behaviors we might have. Update new information, update your goal, and even shift. Like you are on that goal, but get on that goal. So very complex system. I like to think of it as like a juggler, as just like all the balls are in the air, but it's a manager. It really is doing this. So the reason I wanted to tell you that is because, attention is such a topical thing. Like people always say their problems are with attention, and you were asking me about ADD and is it real? Yes, it ends up that people differ along their set points of all three of these systems. And oftentimes we see people that not only are problematic on any one system, like they're too focused. It's a dysregulation. So either hyper-focused, you can't get the flashlight off, or you're hyper-vigilant. You can't stop seeing everything as requiring this broad, receptive, almost anxiety-provoking level of present moment awareness. Or you just can't keep the balls in the air. There's a problem with your juggler. So for sure, people vary along these lines, and sometimes they vary in their coordination. Because none of these systems work alone. The executive control is telling the flashlight where to go. The alerting system is telling you what's going on, so you need to know if you need. So there's this constant fluidity between these things. So sometimes it's the coordination that gets messed up, and when people's lives are negatively impacted by the way their attention functions, to the point where it's actually causing serious problems, that's when sometimes it gets diagnosed as ADD.
My perception on it from a personal experience is that it varies wildly, and that where it varies is where my actual interest lies. If I'm actually interested in something, I have no problem with my attention. But like high school, when I was in high school, I remember there were subjects that I just was bored with, or the teacher was boring, and I just could not pay attention. It was almost impossible. And I was thinking, as I got older and I realized that they were putting kids on Prozac and all kinds of shit for this, I was like, I probably would have got put on drugs if I had the wrong parents. Like if my parents didn't recognize that I just wasn't interested in these things, that it wasn't that there was something wrong with my brain, but I only am capable of concentrating on things I'm interested in. And I don't know why. But I don't care. Because the things that I'm interested in, I'm really good at concentrating on. But the things that I don't give a fuck about, they're like, I don't care. Like I have an amazing capacity to ignore information that I find boring. I just don't. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole world that we could talk about of the bioethics of putting children on medication when they don't fall in line with.
Do you think there's like some sort of an evolutionary reason for that, though? I mean, if we go back to like our hunter-gatherer roots, when say if you were trying to catch a fish, like you're ready to spear a fish and you're hyper-focused, trying to get right to the right spot, the success or failure, your life really depends upon it. Because if you get the nutrition from that fish, you get to live another day, you thrive. If you don't, you're starving and your body gets diminished. These are real life scenarios that we evolved to deal with. So that feeling, like, have you ever gone fishing?
No.
We were talking about it last night with some friends, one of them who happens to be a scientist, and we were saying there's a thing that's like in you. When you catch a fish, Like your whole body gets excited. Like, oh, I got one. And I'm like, that has to be connected to back when we were, primitive people. And that was the only way we gathered food. We had to catch something. And if we caught it, it was a big deal. So you get so stimulated by this act of catching a fish. So much so that like there's a whole world of people who catch fish and let them go.
Yes. The thrill of the catch.
It's a weird, that catch and release shit is fucking weird. It's like, fly fishing.
Yeah.
They make fish hooks that don't have a barb in them. So you can just catch a trout and let it go. I'm like, are you just fucking with these fish? Like, what is this? But meanwhile, like if you say that, they'll get so offended with the gentle art of fly fishing. Like, no, you're just fucking with fish.
Oh, man. But it's the same thing. Let's go back. Let's use fishing just to go connect it back to you in the classroom. You're at some place and you're going back to our ancestors, just like you said. You're fishing. You've got to catch the food. Your life depends on it. You don't catch any fish there. What's going to happen? You're going to move on.
Right.
You're going to be like, you're going to probably start having not the thrill of the catch, but the boredom and irritation of nothing happening that's of interest. So I see boredom as a really important feedback system. Boredom isn't the cause. Boredom is the result of basically the attention system saying, opportunity cost. I'm missing out. Go somewhere else. And so boredom is such a good signal because what it means is go do something else. It's guiding action. And so often it's not like you can't focus. It's that for whatever complex set of reasons your brain biology is saying, try something else. Because probably you'll get more reward out of that. And now that's actually the reason why people miss the 3 back on that experiment. You're sitting there, it's like nothing's going on. And I always think of this every time I walk through security at the airport. The chances of finding a grenade or a bomb in that image, very, very low. But if they screw up, devastating consequences. Yeah. And that's the thing to remember. The reason oftentimes we can't stay on task is because the urge to mind wander away because the intrinsic reward of the situation is low. But sometimes we still have to stay on it. Like you don't want a police officer or a soldier on patrol to be like, this is so freaking boring. I'd rather do something else. They need to be there. Oftentimes I'll ask my military colleagues, you're standing at attention. Where's your attention? I don't know. Well, let's get our minds at attention because that's what we need. You cannot screw up.
Right.
Because even if the chances of something bad happening are low, if they happen and you miss it, it's on you.
So when people are bored, it's essentially the mind telling you that you're wasting time here and that you need to find, like, if you go back to like the evolutionary roots of the way we hyper focus on like a fish that you're trying to catch. If you're bored, that discomfort is essentially your mind saying, this is not productive and this is not helping us survive.
Yeah, it's basically, let's make it even more basic than that. It's saying the reward you're getting here is not enough to keep you here. But it starts with something even more basic. The mind starts wandering. Yeah. And we did this. Like if you look over time in this simple task, 10 minutes, people are worse at the end of the task than at the beginning of the task. And if you ask them, if you stop the experiment every now and then and say, where was your attention right now? Was it on the task or was it off task? The rates of people saying they were off task go up. So they're saying they're more and more off task. Their performance is getting worse. They're more variable. And then if you ask them subjectively, how did it feel to do this task? It was so boring. It's like this is the moment that kind of calculation is probably being done, then you start finding other things. If there's nowhere to go, you'll go internal to your own mind. It's a great place to take a little journey somewhere else.
But that is the other thing I want to bring up, that boredom itself seems to enhance creativity. And there's been some critiques of modern life in terms of the way we use screens to constantly distract ourselves to the point where we don't really get bored anymore. We might get bored, but we're getting enough input that we maintain a certain level of awareness in what we're doing. But you'll find yourself 2 hours in on Instagram, like, what the fuck did I do? I just killed 2 hours.
Exactly.
Where you're at this, like, instead of at 10, like you're catching the fish, you're at like 1 or 2, but you maintain at 1 or 2 and you never get down to baseline. But when you do, when people are legitimately bored, oftentimes that's when creative thoughts come out. And this argument that I've heard multiple times is that we are not bored anymore. So because we're not bored anymore, there's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of ideas that we're missing out on because the mind doesn't have the chance to wander, which is where many of these great ideas come from, is the mind just sitting there thinking.
You're super in sync with everything I write about, frankly, in the book. Because, yes, let's go back to that term mind wandering. Your whatever you took is definitely kicking in.
I'm still dumb right now. It's not ready yet. Another half hour. Talk to me in a half hour. We'll be ready.
So the term mind wandering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so technically, when we ask people, is your mind wandering? What we mean is, did your attention get hijacked away from the thing you're doing? All right, technically, that's what we talk about: off-task thoughts during an ongoing activity. It represents a broader category of something the mind does. It's called spontaneous thought. And it doesn't necessarily have to be thought, by the way. It's just this pump. The brain is constantly, and there's lots of reasons for that, it's pumping out content. And so when we become task focused, when there is something to do and the content is still going on and you now move your attention away from the task to that content that's not related to the task, you are now mind wandering and your performance on the task is going to suffer. You're going to make more mistakes. You're going to have all kinds of problems. And, you were saying a moment ago that when you were little, like you just couldn't focus on things that were boring. And that kind of led us on this whole thing. That's awesome that you're here and your life worked out where you didn't have to go back to focusing on those things that are boring. But I can guarantee, just like going back and you counting the money you were talking about, there are things we have to do in our life that is going to be boring, but we still got to pay attention. Like even if it's watching your kid at the playground or you're having a conversation with somebody and it's boring. Like you got to be able to at least bring yourself back. So the key to all of this, a lot of what we're saying is it's not so much about not having spontaneous thought, and it's not about even feeling boredom. It's about having an awareness of what your mind is doing in the moment. Where is my attention? And if you can do that, all of a sudden a lot of things start changing. So in this case where something boring is happening, you're off. Knowing, oh yeah, look, I'm not on the task anymore. We might call it tuning out. You're actually saying, I don't care. I don't want to do that. That's probably what was happening in school. It's like, I know I'm not paying attention to class and I don't want to. It's really not interesting to me. But you had an awareness of where your mind was. The bigger problem we tend to have, and remember the kind of groups I work with, is that the mind will wander and people are not aware of it. So now they're not paying attention to the task at hand. They're not aware of it, and their performance starts suffering. And, it's not about the nature of the task. It doesn't have to be a boring task. Brain surgeons say their minds wander.
Jesus.
Like, that's consequential. Judges say their minds wander. Generals say their minds wander.
Just part of being a person.
It's just part of being a person, but it's consequential. If you miss key information in any of those scenarios, somebody's life is going to be impacted by that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my interests. Is like, that's a really tricky thing. It kind of goes back to your nootropics thing. How do you train for that? Because I don't think it's going to happen. It doesn't happen on its own all that often. How do you train the mind to pay attention to what's happening moment by moment?
Are we doing this sort of after the fact? Like, should this be something that's a core component of early childhood education, where children can understand why they get bored and what can help them get on track to accomplish goals and give them a feeling of achievement when they do focus and recognize that they can bring their mind on track and that there's a reward for it in accomplishing these tasks, instead of like going back as adults and go, why am I so fucked up? How come I can't pay attention to anything? And go, oh, I never learned how to think correctly. I never learned how to harness my attention.
I mean, right on. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we really don't teach kids how to think very much, do we? We really just sort of show them what they need to learn.
Even before we talk about thinking, what we don't do for any of us, it's very, very rare, is teach people the value and importance of checking out where their mind is moment by moment. And going back to the people with ADD, the patients that have ADD, diagnosable ADD, their life is problematic because of this set of set points they have on all these 3 systems of attention. Those that have this thing we're talking about, which the technical term is meta-awareness, it's essentially a version of that floodlight that I was talking about, broad, receptive, but you're checking out. Technically, meta-awareness is having awareness of the current contents and processes of your mind, moment by moment. So first of all, to say, oh yeah, I can do that. I can see, and we do this all the time. We'd say, oh yeah, look, you just did it a moment ago. My brain's not working right now. Like you're checking in and you're saying right now it's not the crispness I want there to be, but you're attuned to it. And so it may make you do something differently because you're aware of it. If we're not even aware of where our mind is, there's not a lot of opportunity that we can do anything about it. So it ends up, if you look at people with ADD that have a lot of problems, their minds wander a lot, meaning they have off-task thoughts a lot. But they also happen to have good meta-awareness. Their lives don't suffer all that much, meaning they can have a job and do things that are kind of normal kinds of things. So,
do you think we're doing a disservice by medicating people when they have that instead of by training them how to focus?
This is exactly where I'm going. So that was a question I thought was a legitimate thing to ask. We didn't want to start out by saying, stop your medication. So one of the studies we did in my lab is that we recruited a bunch of people, adults with ADD, and we said, just keep on your regular meditation.
What's the average medication? Like, what are they on for the most part? Did you ask them?
I mean, all kinds of things, whether it's Strattera, Wellbutrin, or Adderall, Ritalin.
Some of those are SSRIs, though, right?
There's combinations of things.
Is Wellbutrin an SSRI?
That's not my neuropharmacology is not my thing. You can look it up.
Yeah, Jamie, look it up.
But the point is that we said, whatever your particular medication cocktail is, stay on it. Now take this 8-week mindfulness training program. And that program was like, we started with a minute of practice, very active practices. So now it's not sit quietly and focus on your breath. It's go for a walk, feel the sensations of your feet on the ground. When your mind wanders, come back. So we worked up to about 12 minutes a day for these adults with ADD. And then at the end of the training program, we said, we looked at the objective metrics, looking better, less mind wandering for the people that did the practices. But when I just inquired, what's different about your medication use or your mind, they'd say, before I used to take my Ritalin and then play video games for 8 hours. And I did really awesome on the video games, but I didn't finish my homework or I forgot to go to work. They had this raw power to focus in some sense with some of the medications, but they didn't have the meta-awareness to know if they were using it correctly. Mm-hmm. After the training, that was the number one most consistent thing people said. I was aware of where my mind was. I could use my time better because I was checking in. Where am I right now? Oh, is that tied to where I want to be? Let me redirect. That's also the thing that all of us benefit from with mindfulness training is that not only does it connect to using the flashlight, it allows us to cultivate that kind of broad, receptive stance toward what is unfolding right now so that the executive control system can update, shift, or redirect when things are off track. That makes the whole thing function better. Mindfulness
is a very current term.
Yeah.
People love to use it. And you said before that we might have a different definition. So let's define what mindfulness means.
Yeah. So the way that I use that term is it's a mental mode, meaning it's a way of making the mind. Mindfulness meditation is a set of practices you can do to cultivate this mode. So what is the mode? Mindfulness as a mode is paying attention to our present moment experience without conceptual elaboration.
Conceptual elaboration?
Or emotional reactivity.
What's conceptual elaboration?
Thinking.
So being in the moment without thinking.
And really a specific kind of thinking, this thought, hyperlinking thoughts.
Oh, okay.
So how can you get more data, without the overlay of the story, the editorial, don't editorialize right now. What's happening? What's actually happening? Not your story about what's happening, not you thinking about what's happening. What is happening? That's what I mean by it. And when people now do these breath awareness practices, for example, you're focusing on your breath. You're not controlling the breath. That's where I thought there was a little bit of a distinction between what you were saying and what I'm saying. You're doing nothing with the breath. The only reason we use the breath, handy tool, always changing moment by moment. You're doing it without having to control it. In fact, if you had to actually pay attention to your breath, you'd probably be dead because you'd get distracted.
So you don't have a specific breath technique that you're utilizing?
You're not manipulating the breath at all. You're not.
Just concentrating on the fact that you are actually breathing.
No.
No?
Nope.
You're aware of the fact they're breathing?
You're focusing on the sensations of breathing.
What's the distinction?
Concentrating is a tricky term. It could be, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm breathing. Isn't it so interesting that I have a diaphragm in this part of my body that does these muscle movements that allow this breathing to thought. It's coolness, tingliness, tension. It's like you're literally staying at the most granular raw data of what's happening. And with that awareness of this is happening right now, you're in that meta-aware mode. And I'm not, by the way, manipulating your breath and controlling it and having a particular box breathing or whatever, fantastic thing to do.
Have you done it?
Pranayama, right? These are breath manipulation techniques that can induce all kinds of very interesting states. So, for example, breath work, right? We're actually getting these kind of very cool experiences, very cool thing to do. But that's not what we're going for with mindfulness. With mindfulness, we're using the breath simply as one of many different things we could focus on. Like, the other night I couldn't fall asleep. I'm using, in my hotel room, mindfulness of the air conditioner. Like, just noticing moment to moment the sensations of the sound shifting, just to have a target. Because the instruction is essentially pay attention to breath-related sensations. Like I said, be specific. So you're using that flashlight and you're shining it somewhere. You got a target now. And then, pretty soon you're not there. Notice that the mind has wandered away from breath-related sensations. Bring it back. So you're holding the flashlight, you got the flashlight going, you got the floodlight engaged, and the juggler's always keeping you on track, executive control. That's what I meant by it's engaging all three of the systems of attention as a push-up.
Do we know that there is any benefit to doing that versus doing breath work or vice versa?
The direct head-to-head?
Yes.
Yeah, I have not done that. It would be interesting to see. What I wanted to do is see not so much about acute manipulations, like I know what it feels like to do breath work. It feels really interesting. You get so many amazing insights, just like certain psychedelic substances can give you amazing insights. But I couldn't keep hold of those in the same way. Like they vanish. In some sense, I get some embodied sense of like, this was a really cool insight. It's just like you in the sensory deprivation chamber. Sometimes you get insights and it sort of changes you in a way, but you can't really capture what that is. And I wanted something in the training we were providing to be enduring for people so that they didn't have to go, it's almost like if you're in the middle of a war zone and you got to stay on it, you got to keep your attention focused because you never know when somebody's going to come or go. You probably can't do heliotropic breathing and you probably can't get the zapper out and zap your brain. You just got to have it embodied within you. And it needs to be on demand in that moment. You need to be mindful on demand. And you're up against a lot. 50% of your waking moment, your attention's going to be off somewhere. That's what I wanted to help people cultivate. And that meant sort of a raw workout, a strong workout they could do in the privacy of the preparatory interval. So they had it on more available to them. So
in your book, do you lay out like a specific strategy for achieving these states?
I do. And it's based on 15 years of work where, at the time I started this work, there were solutions. The mindfulness-based stress reduction is an awesome program, gold standard really of mindfulness training. It takes a long time, 8 weeks, 24 hours, 45 minutes of practice a day. Service members were not up for that. In fact, I had like $2 million in grant funding from the Department of Defense. Nobody would take my project. They're like, yeah, that's not too much time. I'll give you an hour, I'm like, I need like 8 weeks. So I ended up writing another grant that said, let me systematically see if I can get a minimum effective dose. Let me go from 8 weeks to 4 weeks and maybe 2 weeks. Let me cut the hours. Let me cut the daily practice time. That led us to an answer. which is that you can go too low so it's not effective, but there is sort of a sweet spot that looks like it's about 4 weeks of training, 8 hours, and about 12 minutes a day. And
That's it, 12 minutes a day. Interesting. Now, how did you get involved with the military? How did they approach you, or was this something that you felt like there would be a good vehicle for research because of the stress that they're under?
Yeah, I was like, what we're seeing is like your attention's worse during pre-deployment, and then you're going to go be deployed.
Right.
And just because my personal interest was in helping people that were experiencing high stress still perform well, in fact, I was not sure what would happen. Remember, I told you about those people in the retreat. We saw attentional benefits there. The first time we ever did work with the military, we actually didn't even have DoD funding. I had private funding, and we found a Marine unit that was willing to do it. And even the guys that welcomed us in were like, yeah, this is never going to work, but we'll give it a try, because frankly, at that point, it was around 2006 and 2007, nothing was working. Deployment after deployment, suicides going up the roof, anxiety, depression, rampant suicidality, and they just were open to like, let's try something else. So we did our first study, even without military DoD funding, and found these beneficial effects, protective effects. And so that's when I was able to write the grants and actually formally start studying it with DoD funding to come to this solution of 4 weeks, 8 hours, 12 minutes a day.
And how did you develop that protocol? So say when you're first working with them and they're like, this is not going to work, but we'll give it a try. How do you know what to start them with? Like, is it experimental?
Right. So what we did is we took really it's science. So we took a very incremental approach. Tiny little steps. So we had 8 weeks of this program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. Many, many studies were done on it. Got a suite of practices like the one we talked about, and others, because you're not just training the flashlight, you're training the floodlight too. It's a really nice suite of practices. Started that. Are you getting bored now?
No, I just yawned. I'm not bored.
Okay, good.
Just an inadvertent yawn.
No problem. So we just said, let's take this same program and contextualize it for service members. Let's use language that's related to their life. Let's have the discussion regarding the benefits of this program.
When you say language related to their life, like how so?
Well, like in the program that we use now, for example, we talk about why you need attention. We use terms that have to do with what they know regarding the use of attention in their life as a soldier. So you know that you have to zero your weapon to calibrate it to be able to do the job. Zero the mind. So we can use concepts that are tied to military life, but now actually related to attention as essentially your biggest, weapon is a tricky word, but resource to be able to do what you need to do.
Do you have any experience at all in the military, or did you ever deploy? Did you nothing?
Look
right?
at me.
No, I'm just asking because I don't know.
So,
how would you go about finding what the requirements are?
Totally. Well, the first project I did, I collaborated with a former service member, so she was able to. She'd been deployed and was a mindfulness expert. This was a woman.
Oh, that's convenient.
Very. Yeah. And then we've been able to now do studies where we partner with people that train soldiers and teach them to be trainers. So
what your goal is to make them perform better under these periods of high stress.
The goal, ultimately, not just perform better, but feel better. And we do it by looking at attention and psychological health. So we know if we do nothing under pre-deployment and even deployment, attention's going to tank, mood's going to get worse. Can we do anything to protect against that?
So are you giving them tools that will help them in combat, or are you giving them tools that will help them just in life, in this very bizarre and highly stressful world of being deployed, of being an active duty soldier, or both?
Both.
Both. So when you're thinking about them being deployed and them being in combat situations, how are you calculating? How are you deciding what to show them, what not to show them? What are you working with imagery and visualizations? How are you maintaining their focus?
Very, very simple. In some sense. Remember back to what we were saying. These are fundamental capacities. We need attention to think, to regulate our emotions, to connect. What I wanted to do is see if we could increase the raw availability of their attention and protect it from decline, which we showed in the pre-deployment phase. We didn't say anything in particular regarding how they might use this during deployment. And this is not like this is just like any kind of good physical fitness routine. Like, I don't have to tell you, Joe, so now that you've worked out your upper body, when you're at the airport in an airplane and you need to put your suitcase up, you can use your upper. It's like, no, if you got this,
it's part of
you know how to use it. What was so interesting, because we had no idea how it would translate, frankly, in the early days to the combat context, because you're completely amped up. This is not training anymore. You could die. What I was really surprised by was what we saw in the Marines themselves. So, we offer this program. We find that it's protective if they do 12 minutes or more. And then not everybody did 12 minutes or more. We had like a group of them that were kind of resistors. They thought I was full of it. I don't care. I'm not doing this. And they didn't practice. And that subgroup actually looked like the control group. They got worse over time. Even though they went to the training, they were not interested. They come back, we test them again. And this subgroup looked better than before they were deployed. I was like, what? This makes no sense. How do they go from being worse over 8 weeks? Now they're deployed to a war zone, they come back and they're better than that. I had all these grandiose ideas as scientists do, like maybe they felt activated by their mission and that got their attention up. So I asked my colleague, the trainer, was there anything that stands out about this particular group of names? Because they're not showing the normal pattern of essentially more degradation. And she said, oh yeah, these are the guys that contacted me from Iraq and said, that stuff you were trying to teach us that I thought was complete BS, well, the guys that are doing it are sleeping through the night. They're coming back from mission and patrol and not getting the shakes. Teach me that. So they actually started practicing while they were deployed. And then when they came back, we saw that the benefits in their attentional performance. So I would say we're not being overly prescriptive. We trust the expertise that the service members have to implement these skills in their lives. But we are providing them the tools so that the training regime is like a cross training for their attention. You got all three systems are going to get activated, and you got this meta awareness, so you kind of know where your mind is. You can get back on track as you need to.
Did you have to tweak the protocol? Did you have it pretty firmly established before you started working with soldiers? How did you develop how to get them going with this?
We used that same 8-week program that was established, and then the only thing we really did was start tweaking the time. Okay, if you can't be with a group for 24 hours, you got to cut something. What should we cut? And this is where it got really interesting, too, because I kind of just used my hunches with regard to physical training. If you're going to go learn some new particular, let's say you're just going to go get a personal trainer. You want to know how to do the workout. You want to maximize the benefits. If you went to the gym and you met this person, all they did is tell you how great their training is, how it works, technically, why it's the best training program, you'd probably be like, yeah, no, can you just show me the workout? Can we just do it? Can we do the reps together? So that's sort of what we did. We took the program and we kind of split it up. We had gotten it down to 16 hours or so, and we split it up, and I said, I want one 8-hour group that really just focuses on the workout, and the other one that has a lot of talking about the mindfulness benefits and the problems with stress, et cetera. And then we put them head to head. So we had one group that got nothing, one that got the training focused, and one that got the talking about it. And the talking about it was pretty much just like the no training at all. It was just get to the workout. That also helped us shrink the time down to 8 hours. So this has been where we've been kind of honing it over and over again. We did a project with special operators where at that point we were about 4 weeks and 8 hours. And I said, can we crunch it more? Can we get to 2 weeks? And we couldn't. Even with that level of an elite warrior, 2 weeks was too short, which I think is tied to how long it takes to train and physiologically change attention.
So you're doing basically 12 minutes a day for 4 weeks? Mm-hmm. And does it vary, or is it basically the same type of exercise over and over again for that 4 weeks?
It's a suite of practices. So the one aspect is this finding your flashlight, as I call it, practicing, focusing. The other one is really something that goes back to actually your comment regarding the deprivation chamber. What did you call it? The
sensory deprivation
sensory deprivation chamber. Exercising the floodlight. And that we call open monitoring. It's a totally different kind of practice. So, and I can say more about that. But then there's another practice that is actually what we call connection practice, but it's about offering kind of well wishes toward yourself. So it's a suite of practices that rounds out these multiple aspects of attention. But maybe we talk about open monitoring if you're up for it.
Yeah, please.
So, because I would be very curious to see what you think, especially if you practice this and even bring it to in the context of the sensory deprivation, because it seems to really help with basically divergent thinking and generation of mental content, let's just say. So the practice itself, let me just give you an example of something I describe in the book. This is now, because remember at the core of it, mindfulness training is about taking an observational stance. It's like whatever's happening is happening and you're there watching it. You're watching, you have a goal, and for the practices we've talked about so far, the goal is focus on something in particular. Notice that you're staying focused. If you're not, come back, right? That's what we talked about already. Beneficial effects when people do that. The goal is don't focus on anything. You're not going to actually engage in anything. The goal is that you don't focus. Now, not resisting focusing, but allowing thoughts, feelings, sensations, any mental content, any external stimulation to come and pass away. So it was funny that you were talking about fishing because the practice, I named it just like river of thought. So you kind of visualize yourself sitting at the bank of a river, like maybe there's like a little rock there. You're sitting, you're solid, you're stable. And essentially, you're just going to, if you want to lower or close your eyes, think of your conscious mind as the passing of content through this river in front of you. And you're not going to go for the fish or follow it or follow the leaf. You're just going to allow whatever arises to come up and then pass away. And that's what's interesting about working memory, like we were talking about before. Working memory is the scratch space of consciousness. And for anything to stay in our conscious experience, we need to keep rewriting it. We need to follow it. We need to hyperlink it, or else it's going to dissolve away. It just won't stay on the whiteboard. So you're practicing allowing whatever occurs to occur without chasing it or pursuing it, just watching it.
So just the idea of the river is just like a vehicle for allowing you to let these thoughts just flow through your mind?
Some people say, you could imagine this mind as a vast open sky and thoughts, feelings, sensations are like clouds passing it. There's all these images you can use, but the goal is you are aware, you're meta-aware of what's happening, but you're not grabbing onto anything. You don't have a thought pop up and be like, oh, I need to write that down. Or like, what are 5 things that are related to that? You're not making your mental grocery list. You're like, I had a thought that said, I need to get milk. Move on.
So for people that are listening to this and they go, okay, but how does that help?
How does that help?
How does that help me?
When you are in a situation where you are stuck, ruminating, worrying, catastrophizing, first of all, you're usually not aware that that's happening. So this practice allows you to cultivate an awareness, because that's all you're really doing. You're just being aware of what's happening. You're not doing anything with it. So you want to cultivate that. But also, typically, when we're in those kind of really sticky states, we don't know what to do. We keep looping on them, or we dig ourselves further into a hole. We don't have the capacity to distance and broaden. And if we do that, we can allow the content to pass away. And that's where it becomes extremely powerful. We can psychologically distance or decenter ourselves so that there's a steadiness and watchfulness. And we're not so caught up in the negative and destructive mental content that we can't see our way out.
So is it kind of like cleaning the mind's closet? Like getting rid of unnecessary things that could be there that you would concentrate on?
No, you're not getting rid of anything.
No?
No.
Is there any cleansing effect?
There's cleansing effect in that you're staying observant yet disengaged. Now, when could this be useful in a real situation? You're in a really heated conversation with someone. You're angry. You're super angry, but you need to get along with this person because there's some deliberation. And military leaders will talk about this. In fact, one of the most powerful ways this practice shows up in real life is listening. So what does it mean to actually listen, especially when there's hostile, complex content that's happening? And this is one of the stories I describe in the book where one of the first military service member leaders that allowed us to do this project, I met him as a colonel. He ended up being now he's a 3-star general, but he was deployed to Iraq, and his job was to manage the entire multinational land force. And so he had to go to these various places right after ISIS had been sort of defeated, and groups that were not talking to each other, that were aligned because they all had to fight this common enemy, ISIS, now they were having infighting. Like they weren't getting along with each other. So he had to go and talk to 3 leaders. They come together and they're so angry. They're so angry with the United States. They're so angry at each other. And he basically was taking this, he used his mindfulness practice because he started practicing when we first introduced this to his soldiers. And he said it was so powerful to be able to just really listen and for them to experience somebody really listening. And he was taking it in. He was taking in what he was hearing. He wasn't giving his responses. And he fully heard it, was able to kind of communicate it back. And it shifted the entire dynamic where one of the leaders was like, we can actually work with you. We can actually work with you, because what he didn't do is get caught up in his own reactivity. He didn't start formulating responses. He didn't take that flashlight anywhere. He was really taking that observational, steady, emotionally non-reactive stance. And he could fully get the information he needed to then respond with a thoughtful answer. And that's just one example of the kinds of things that can happen in our lives when we practice this capacity to distance ourselves and fully observe what's going on. We can intervene, of course, but we're not so driven to intervene before we really are able to observe first.
This practice of using this in the military, I think, would be insanely beneficial. But I would wonder how many people are involved in terms of like how many scientists and how many soldiers, and whether or not you see this being deployed on a much broader scale.
Yeah, right now it's starting to get a lot of traction. It's still mostly been done in the context of research studies, but I just actually co-hosted with the UK, United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense, a 10-nation summit where we brought together 10 different countries that are all starting to implement mindfulness within their forces, to have sort of an international conversation regarding this. So it's not quite there yet. It's not like a program of record. People can go on the website and sign up for it. But it's starting to get noticed. And right now we're doing a project. We did a project in collaboration with Army scientists with basic combat training, where we offered this program, which was mindfulness and yoga, to new recruits. And it's beneficial, had a lot of beneficial effects. We're also doing a project with all the newly minted 1-star generals in the Army. So we're trying to get sort of through the career path also different points at which this could happen. We're also doing a project with schoolhouse settings. So the Special Operations Qualification School will now start, we'll be testing this. But it's mostly through research right now. And really, my lab has been one of the only ones that's been consistently doing it.
I know a lot of professional athletes, fighters, that are using mindfulness training, and some of them that have even gone to sports psychologists, and the sports psychologists have implemented a lot of similar techniques in trying to focus them. When you do put this protocol together and you do work with these soldiers, are you trying to have a specific time? Like, do they wake up in the morning? Is that like one of the first things they do in order to start the day correctly? Like, is there a good way to do it? Is it good to do it at the end of the day when you're reflecting? Like, when is the best way to get this and to implement it?
The short answer is the best time to implement it is when you're going to implement it. I mean, you got to get yourself to do it like any habit.
If you have discipline, like if you're a professional athlete, they're very, very disciplined.
Absolutely. So we have not, as far as I know, there are no studies that have formally assigned people to do practice different times of day to see the benefits. People do vary in terms of their time. What we're trying to do right now, at least in the military context, is see if something like a mindful cool down after the morning PT may be helpful. Then you kind of get a twofer where You've already had the physical exercise. It's yoked to a routine in your day, and then you're just going to have this 12-minute thing, 12 to 15-minute thing you do after that. For the rest of us who aren't service members or professional athletes, my guidance is always yoke it to something that you do as part of your routine. You're going to do it every day. Maybe it's right before or after you brush your teeth or have your morning coffee. So there's no question of debating whether you're going to do it or not. And then start really, really small. Don't start with 12 minutes a day. Start, say you're going to do 3 minutes, and then cut that in half, and that's going to be your goal. Because you got to get it to the point where it's achievable and you get that experience of I'm doing it, I'm committed. It's habit formation. And then slowly build up to 12 minutes.
Do you think there's benefit in starting your day with it, though? It seems like
For me, there is.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, that's when I like to do it during the day because it sort of sets it's not even, I know this from our lab of what the objective results say. For me, I like doing it in the morning because usually if I do it at night, I'll fall asleep, frankly. It's very,
probably good to help you fall asleep.
That's what a lot of the soldiers say. They're like, your mind is racing. You can't fall asleep. You start supplementing with things that probably aren't that useful, oftentimes, not the kind of stuff you probably would recommend for sleep. And they do a body scan, which is sort of like this practice where you're taking the flashlight, guiding it through the whole body, and they're out. And I do it too to fall asleep, but I'm not doing it. The intention is not as a relaxation and sleep aid. I like to do it in the morning because, in some sense, it's like I've found my flashlight again. It's like it's going to be all over the place, but kind of reminding you this is a fundamental capacity that you hold to know where your mind is, moment by moment, even if you're not going to do anything differently. But you can if you want to because you're aware of it.
So for the regular person who's not a soldier or a professional fighter or anybody who's in ridiculously high stress situations, how do they apply this to their life?
I mean, that's why I wrote the book, frankly.
Same way?
Very similar ways. Of course, it's not going to be as consequential, but, as simple as not freaking out when you get cut off in traffic. When you want to work on a report, you're not on a group text. You're actually aware, I'm getting pulled in and sucked in. My flashlight's getting yanked. I got to get it back. Where am I right now? Interpersonal, relationships. You can actually, and this is what happened to me, right? So I'm just giving that example. I could see my spouse again. I could actually I could see the look on his face. I could look at my child. It changes the nature of and quality of the way we interact with other people. So not just for improved ability to think, your attention is more available, your working memory is more available to you. It stress proofs those kind of abilities because you're not in mental time travel to the past or future. You're here when you want to be. But our emotions can be better regulated. Our connections are stronger. So it ends up showing up over and over again for everybody. And that is what motivated me to write the book. I'm like, if it can help these people, how do we bring it so that everybody can do it? And also just educate them about the nature of their attention so they understand what the vulnerabilities, what they're up against.
Isn't it kind of incredible that we got to 2021 without this being a normal, regular part of most people's life? Right? If you think about how important it is, your focus and your attention and the way you think and the way you approach various tasks and problems in your life, the fact that this is not a normal part of everyone's day is really kind of strange because it's so important. Everybody's like, oh, I'm distracted, or I can't get my shit together, or God, I wish I was more disciplined, and I really wish I was more focused. And how few people actually apply techniques to enhance that. It's kind of stunning, right? Because it's not like it's not cost prohibitive. It's not like it's something that takes a deep education of, many, many, many years of training and, and the fucking esoteric arts. No.
12 minutes a day.
Kind of crazy, right?
Well, I love that you're saying that. I love that you're having that kind of slight outrage about it because this has been a huge passion of mine. 100 years ago, if you saw somebody running down the street, you'd think they were nuts. They're getting chased by a bear. Something serious is going wrong.
Right.
Now it's normalized. We know that you need to physically move your body in a certain way for a certain number of minutes a week for you to stay physically fit.
You don't think they ran in 1920?
Okay, maybe 1900.
Right.
Okay,
maybe
but
1820. They
maybe
probably
1820.
were
But the
running
point,
from Buffalo and shit.
yeah, and but when the military instituted, and it was the first real organization that instituted physical fitness, there was a lot of pushback. Like, what? I'm going to sit
Really?
here and be like jump up and down. No, I'm not doing that.
The military was the first to implement
Yeah,
that?
yeah. In fact, it was a military. It was a Navy scientist who used the term aerobics.
What's his name?
Oh, I can't remember. Cooper.
Cooper?
Yeah, I think it was Dr. Cooper. So
And this is from when?
not that long ago. I mean, the aerobics thing was, then it turned into the whole aerobic
Right.
activity, Jane Fonda. Yada, yada.
Right. The good old days.
But so think about how far we've come
Yeah.
over, let's say not
With
100
physical
years,
fitness.
200 years.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating.
The mind is no different than the rest of the body. We need to exercise it regularly to stay psychologically fit and optimize our performance. The question has been, how do you do that? And the funny thing when writing this book is like, oh, it's that thing people have been doing for thousands of years. We're just putting the modern lens of science on it to say, this is why it's probably been helpful for people for thousands of years.
It's a really interesting comparison what you're saying with physical fitness because if you pay attention, like particularly like what you get out of social media, there's so many incredibly fit people now. There's so many people that make a living like showing you workouts, and a large percentage of the people that I know regularly go to the gym or take a spin class or do something where they're stimulating their body and putting it under stress.
Yeah.
Where you look at like the way people look today, just the physical stature, the muscles that they have and how the fitness, like that was really rare just 60 years ago.
Very rare.
And the fact that this has changed so radically within, this generation, it's pretty amazing. If we could get the same sort of application, if we could do the same sort of focus and put it on your mind, really have some pretty significant changes in the way we interface with each other, the way we get through our lives, what we can focus on, what we can accomplish, and probably happiness too, right?
Exactly. So, I love that you're saying this. I can't tell you. Remember back to the days when they said it was career suicide? And I just was like, I don't care. I'm doing this. I think it's some value. So to me, it is extremely gratifying to hear you say that you get it. And also the fact that you think that the fact that it was considered as career suicide is like weird.
Yeah,
Because
I didn't
not
know.
only in 60 years have we been able to transform the way we think about physical wellness, in 15 years we've been able to start making a lot of traction on the benefits of this type of training on the mind. And so I think that things are looking quite hopeful. And frankly, it couldn't come soon enough because the nature of the world is going to continue to get more complex, more interconnected, more uncertain. I mean, the last couple of years with this pandemic, same idea. The challenges are going to amp up, and we need to arm ourselves, meaning we need to prepare our minds for a type of mental armor.
We're also experiencing distraction that's wholly unnatural, like in terms of social media.
Absolutely.
The ability to constantly look at these things and just be inundated. And for some people, they get really fixated in conflict and getting in these little arguments with people that they're nowhere near them.
Oh, totally.
When they're doing it online and arguing about, political things or social things.
Well, it goes back to something you said a while ago about the benefit of having, what did you call it? Getting bored.
Yeah.
I would say I call it essentially task-free time. Like create active white space in your day where you're task-free. And if that doesn't mean you're going to take extra time out, but you have plenty of these moments already where be aware that attention is going to get fatigued if you continue to use it. And if you think that being on social media as your downtime is giving your attention a break, you're wrong. You are in a task context, and you are expending out your attention every time you scroll. In fact, that's why these social media companies are making gajillions of dollars. Your attention is the commodity. You are giving it. That is the product. So to be aware that it's not innocuous, it actually is problematic, and to be aware that, a solution like break up with my phone is not a reasonable and realistic solution. You're going to need your phone. Like, even if I think about my kids, I ask them, what are you guys doing to well, I don't even have to ask them. They tell me. They got rid of all their social media apps so it's not distracting. But for some apps that they have to use, they just use another piece of software that limits the time so that they're very kind of...
This is your children?
Yeah.
Really?
So they go in and they're like, I got 3 more minutes to use YouTube. So
They've done this voluntarily?
they did, because they have to figure out a way to manage their own thing.
How
so
old are they?
15 and 19.
Really? Interesting. Now, do you think this because you're their mom? And
Maybe. I don't know.
They're more hyper aware of the problems with not focusing and not paying attention to things?
I don't know if that's it, or they're just
It's got to be. No 15 and 19-year-old does that shit on their
I
own.
mean, you'd be surprised. I think that we think that children are unaware of the costs of social media on their attention, and we're wrong. They are suffering, and they know it. They're
they're
just
going to fix it. Facebook changed their name. They're fixing it. Now it's not going to be a problem anymore. Did you hear that? They decided to change their name.
okay. Well,
What's that?
The metaverse.
The metaverse?
Yeah. They're trying to. They're changing the whole company, man.
What's it called?
They haven't announced it yet, but it's they're focusing on that new thing that's taking over the internet.
What is the new thing? What are you talking
The
about?
metaverse. I've been trying to tell you about it for a few weeks.
Well, explain yourself.
I don't really know how to explain it honestly, but like it's the Web 3.0 is I've heard it discussed that way. It's a combination of VR, AR, NFTs, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, decentralized social media,
And this is what Facebook's concentrating on now?
and yeah.
responsible behavior from social media companies is awesome. Great. Please continue.
I don't trust it. I
But-
don't believe that's what they're doing. They're trying to stay alive.
They're also the corporate version of it, so it's
Right.
very hot to take over, and that's why they're
Yeah.
But here's what I do know. If you train your attention in this way and have more meta awareness, use it in the context of your social media use. Like, notice you're going for the phone. Notice you're picking it up. Notice that your face was recognized. You're clicking on the app. Be aware as you're scrolling. Like, we can advantage ourselves so that there's more decision points of what we're going to do instead of being, like you said, 3 hours into your doom scrolling and you feel like
Yeah.
shit and you just can't do anything. So
Confused.
yeah. So anyway, going back to that white space idea. So the reason I think this is so important is because if we'd never allow for the spontaneous arising of thought, we're going to have the exact consequences you already described. Our chances for positive visioning, creative problem solving, insight, and frankly, positive mood we're disadvantaging that. We're cutting out the thing that will help us with that. And I always think about it. It's like actually even more than that. Like I think about what we do with our mind, our attention, most days, most of our lives, as like taking my dog for a walk. Every morning, we take my husband takes him, or I take him. He's on a leash. We got our thing to do. Sure, you may like wander around, but I'm pretty much keeping the leash. That's attention. We're in line. We're trying to do what we do. Frankly, we're leashing ourselves with a lot of our social media use because we're now constrained by the content they're providing. Some days, and maybe you do this with your dog too, you're taking the dog to the dog park, take it off leash, runs around, is so joyful. I feel joyful. Like there's a freedom in that. And we need to do that with our own mind, with our own attention. We need to know that this is a valuable thing to do, and we need to take the moments, and they could be micro moments. When you're standing at the checkout line, don't check out. Don't pick up the phone. Just be there with yourself. Allow your mind to go where it will. Take those moments in nature. Take the walk from the office to the car as just to be with yourself. Maybe some days after you're done listening to this podcast, you turn off the radio or silence your phone and just be in the car and drive. We need to return to these moments because, frankly, we need it.
It's fascinating that you're saying something that seems so simple. Just put your phone down and that just live your life. But that would be some sort of a therapy. And that just literally the act of walking from your car to the store.
It's radical.
And not checking your phone while you're doing it is actually good for your brain. What about other physical activities? Like, what do you think the benefits are, whether it's yoga or running or something like that? How much of, because there's a thing that when I was younger, they discussed martial arts, they talked about it as a moving meditation. And I remember thinking that like when you're doing it, it's so difficult to do that all you can think about is it.
Yeah.
And there's some sort of an effect while you're engaging in that it helps the mind. It cleanses the mind. It removes the significance of a lot of these the internal dialogue and the bullshit that you have going on inside your head.
Yeah. And, in some sense, these are also traditional practices, right? So where we've got a very active mind that's either ruminating or catastrophizing, something like yoga or other forms of sort of body-based practices, keep that button on play instead of fast forward or rewind, because they have to be. Like if you cannot be distracted, you will fall over, right? Or you get punched in the face. Like whatever it is, you are not going to be able to go away from the now. You are in the now, but you're doing it, and that actually moves us more toward why we do this in the first place. We're not sitting there quietly focusing on our breath because we want to be like Olympic level breath followers. Nobody cares about their breath or following it. It's just that we're trained in the same way we might not want to. It's not the most fun thing to sit there and lift weights, but we do it because it carries over into our lives. So now it's not necessarily about when my mind wanders away from the breath, return it, but when my mind wanders away from what you're saying, return it, right? So we want to keep translating that over and over again. I think movement-based practices, active practices, are getting us even more aligned with dealing with the fluidity and complexity of real life.
Do you apply that also to your work with the military? Like, is maybe that's something that, like, while they're doing physical training, is there a way to think during that helps?
You mean orient to the physical training?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this is why you already mentioned that you have friends that are athletes that are using this. In many ways, what are the things that drive down performance excellence? If you think about that, right? You're a competitive athlete. And what is it that's going to mess you up? It's probably not. You've already perfected the physical. You know the movements. You've practiced them thousands of times. It's the inner dialogue. So it's either I'm the best thing ever. I got this. Or I really messed up. How am I ever going to recover? Or this other team is doing this, and you have a story about it and you're imposing it. These are all ways that the mind is behaving that, frankly, disadvantages getting more information about what's actually occurring.
Yeah, it's often paralysis by analysis is a big one, the fear of consequences, that they concentrate on the negative possibilities, the negative consequences, and that becomes crippling, and the anxiety of fear overcomes them.
Yeah.
It's like Customato is a legendary, he was a legendary boxing trainer, trained Mike Tyson, and he had this great saying that fear is like fire. You could use it to cook your food, or it could burn your house down. Yeah. Like, you need some fear because it's a motivating factor, and it makes sure that you're aware of what you're about to do, that it's very dangerous, and that what you're doing is you have to be completely prepared, and you must be disciplined in order to achieve that preparation. But you also can't let it just run away, because if it just burns you down, then you'll be paralyzed with fear.
Exactly.
And there's a balance there, but how to achieve that balance?
Exactly. And that's the question. So you can understand this conceptually, but how do you not let fear turn into a raging fire? I mean, most of the ways we approach this is distract yourself or pretend the fear's not actually worthy of feeling fear or suppress it. These are not effective approaches. They're not. And frankly, one of the reasons they're not effective is because they're sucking up your attention. You are actually putting so much energy into suppressing that you're going to have no capacity left to deal with what's in front of you. Mm-hmm. So these, like going back to that open monitoring practice, fear is present. Fear is my friend sitting here next to me. Fear is here. It is so here. Or sadness. Whatever the strong emotion is, to be with that emotion, not deny it, not suppress it, and not feed it, is the point of power, and that's what we train for with something like an open monitoring practice. We acknowledge the existence. The river could be burning content over and over again. Yes, it is here, and I'm here for it. That's a different way to address this and to achieve it. And we this is not just an idea, it's training.
Right. Now, when you talked about this training, particularly with the military, where you're talking about 4 weeks and you're doing 12 minutes a day, if you wanted to achieve a greater level of mastery over your consciousness, would you recommend other things on top of that? Like, this seems like something that's it's practical. You can get people to do it. It's applicable, but is it optimal?
I love this question. Okay, 12 minutes a day is the answer to what is the minimum effective dose for me to benefit. Every study we've done with mindfulness training where we offered people the opportunity to practice as long as they got to 12, they benefited. 12 to 15. The more they did, the more they benefited. So that's the first thing to say, that it is like physical activity. You don't have to limit yourself to 12 minutes. I almost think of 12 minutes as like couch to 5K. It's enough of a load that it's helping. It's definitely helping. Now, if you want to keep going, go for it. If you want to double that, go for it. In fact, for me, in circumstances where I know I'm going to be under a heavy load, like even coming here today, maybe I'll do 24 minutes. Maybe I'll do a half an hour.
What'd you do today?
Just 30 minutes in the morning.
What'd you do?
I did two things. I did the focus attention practice, and I did something else called loving kindness. And loving kindness is that third category. I talked about concentrative practices, receptive practices, and these are really heart practices, compassion practices. That one is actually really helpful when you've got a big performance coming up. Because frankly, for all of us who are interested in excellence in how we perform, that can take on an edge of self-punitive orientation where we're so fixated on the things we want to do better, we forget what we wish for ourselves. So a loving kindness practice is essentially a sequence of phrases you say privately to yourself to remind yourself of what your ultimate wish is for yourself, for other people in your lives. Have you heard of these kinds of practices?
No, not that one.
Okay, so it's called loving kindness. I never call it loving kindness because
What do you call it?
Connection practice. Because that's what you're connecting with yourself and other people. So
does loving kindness practice sound too
you tell me.
airy-fairy?
Would you jump on? Would you sign up for something if I said?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
Thank you, because we need that kind of shift in orientation. Most people, they would probably like, yeah, no, I'm not up for it.
Really? Isn't that funny that they would shy away from love and kindness?
It is a shocking thing, but I don't care. I mean, I'll at some point we'll call it loving kindness. It's just
I think
like
those phrases have been co-opted by fruits. Like crazy people with like wooden beads who are like, trying to be a guru.
That's
you know what I mean? There's a little bit of
sort of
that.
the thing. It's like it's affiliatively kind of problematic and it's very plain. And actually, with a lot of the groups that we work with, shockingly maybe, they love this practice. Like the cadets I was talking about, it's one of the ones that they ask for often.
I think it's a good practice, but I think it's one of those things like when people say, I'm spiritual, you go, oh, are you really? It's like those phrases have been co-opted by so many people that are kind of fraudulent, or at least they want you to there's a thing that people do where they want you to think that they're enlightened, right?
Yeah.
And it's annoying. Like when you
I think basically that sums it up. It's annoying.
It's annoying because they're hustling.
Yeah, or
Right.
there's another agenda that doesn't really have to
Right.
do. So I'm taking, again, just to kind of reclaim my turf, it's really in line with what do people need to do to move toward optimizing was the question that you were asking. So
It's a great phrase, though.
I love it.
It really is. Love and kindness is really the right way to
Yeah,
look at
and
it. Maybe we should just ignore the cuckoos.
and just call it that. One of my
Yeah.
favorite, Jack Cornfield, he talks about this, but another teacher named Sharon Salzberg, she is amazing. She was actually one of our consultants for the military project. So can I just tell you a little bit about loving kindness?
Yeah,
Add to your
please,
toolkit.
yeah.
All right, so in the sequence of things, first we teach people these concentrative practices. Then we bring in the open monitoring because it's a little bit more complicated to stay steady enough to not wander. This loving kindness category is the last thing we teach them. It kind of rounds out the program. So what you do is you, similar to everything else, sit comfortable, quiet place, do it seriously, like take it seriously, and you're going to. It's a practice of well-wishing, like the way you might say happy birthday or have a good day. You're not demanding anything. It's not positive self-talk. It's not manifesting. It's a well-wishing, all right? And you do it because you're bringing to mind, keeping on your whiteboard, working memory, what matters. So, for example, in the way that I do it, you start out with yourself. And today I did it only for myself. But what you typically do is you say these phrases, and I'll say them in a second. You start with yourself, and then you move to a close other, a benefactor, somebody who's been good to you. Then you move to a neutral person, somebody we don't know, maybe a cashier at a restaurant or in a store you go to often. And then a slightly more difficult person. And then you kind of expand to your team, to your community, to all beings everywhere. And it's like you're doing this to kind of broaden the circle of care and concern. Who matters? What matters? So the kind of phrases you say are, I'm just giving you mine and you can choose whatever, but short, sweet, simple. May I be happy? May I be healthy? May I be safe? May I live with ease? And every time you say that, just happy, healthy, safe, ease, is just, what do I wish for myself? Like in my life, ultimately, what do I want? I want to be happy. I want to advantage that. I want to feel psychologically safe. I want to feel physically safe. I want to have ease in my life. Who wants a headache? So you say this to yourself over and over, and it's like reminding you of like, fundamentally, what do I want? I wish this for my loved ones. I wish it for you. I wish it for Jamie. I wish it for everybody in this building. I wish it for everybody in, you can see how you expand the circle. For our military service members, in some sense, they have no problem wishing it for their team. Of course you want everybody on your team to have these qualities. Oftentimes a little bit trickier to wish it for yourself, but something really interesting starts happening when you do this. A lot of the sort of self-critical and self-punitive wars we have with ourselves can start getting dialed down. It's like, I could kind of badger myself for something, but ultimately, is this in my best interest for what I really want in my life? And it really helps, by the way, with the kind of maybe very loved one that can also sometimes be the difficult one. So this, I'm going to just give you an example from my personal life. Like even with my spouse, of course I love my spouse, but he can drive me nuts. And even in the middle of an argument, if I can kind of remember, if I do a practice and he's the focus of the practice, we're in the middle of an argument, if there's any room where I can be a little bit, lean into some understanding or a little more broadly receptive, I extend that probably more than I would if I hadn't done the practice. It just keeps that kind of orientation of what the purpose is of what we're doing in our lives in mind.
Don't you think there's also room for, if you want to achieve things in life, one of the things that you do have to do is you have to be self-critical. You have to be your worst critic, because that's the only way, you're the only one who really knows whether or not you put in all the effort that you need to put in order to achieve things, whether or not you really did everything that was necessary, or whether or not your work was really good. If you're being honest with yourself and objective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in that regard, you kind of got to be a personal critic.
So
how do you balance that out?
Nobody has to be taught how to be a personal critic.
Some people do.
Maybe.
Some people
Which
are delusional.
I would say,
but what's interesting, those people don't really get anywhere. The people that think they're better than they are, or they lie to themselves, they deny themselves the discomfort of failure.
Yeah.
Because they're delusional. And in doing so, they deny themselves the opportunity for growth and learning.
Absolutely. So I think you kind of answered your question, which is, this is a corrective. The default is being self-critical. And then we end up into not just productive self-criticism, but ruminating and catastrophizing regarding something we already said or something we're going to do that we don't think is going to go well. And that's why I did it this morning, because I know that under consequences, and I encourage people that have performance as something, like you perform every time you do this podcast, there's a performance element to it. Whenever we have to do that, there's going to be those around the edges aspects of evaluation. Those are natural. They should happen. That's how we get to be as good as we can be. This is just adding that other piece in, like a loving person in your life might, but toward you. To say, yeah, of course, you better look at it. And by the way, all those other practices are to do that first part. See what is. How was that? Did I actually perform at my best? What could I have brought in that was better? How could I have actually been clearer? Whatever it is, we're trying to see with that non-reactivity. And this is the heart that we're putting around it. We're acting in a loving and kind way toward ourselves so that as we move forward, we're not pushing too far into the self-criticism where it becomes self-hatred, which is also unproductive.
Self-hatred. So how does one balance out self-criticism and not let it turn into self-hatred?
Yeah, we want productive, just like for anybody else. If I were going to critique you, you'd probably want me to do it in a way that's going to be helpful to you. Yeah. Instead of saying, yeah, but I don't like you at all anyway. You're a jerk. Nobody wants that. But we do that to ourselves. We turn the things that are problematic and are worthy of our looking at into some kind of deep character flaw. Instead of being able to keep it at the level of, I see what there is to do, and I'm just going to do that.
Right.
I don't have to hate you for it. Just do it differently.
The problem with like a lot of super achievers, a lot of people that go on to be like at the top of their field, like especially athletes, is that it requires a fanaticism. It requires you being obsessed.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to balance obsession with these hyper-focused super achievers with self-love. There's very little self-love going on when you're obsessed.
I think that may be the default of how things turn out, but I don't see them as contradictory at all. I think you totally can love yourself and totally be striving for excellence. Why can't you?
I don't know.
Well, look at that.
See, the thing is, like, there's not that many of them out there to study. Like when you get a Michael Jordan or a Mike Tyson or a person that's like at the very top of their field, when they're especially in competition, because it requires so much energy and intensity, that oftentimes they develop this antagonistic relationship with both themselves and the competition, and they're just ferocious and fierce all the time, including with their own personal demons. They're like constantly in combat. And with those people, I think their periods of happiness are brief and they come after success. And then they constantly chase that dragon. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but I do know that that's the only way that the greats really, they all seem to be the same. There seems to be something about truly great hyper performers where they're getting up earlier than everybody else, they're more intense than everybody else, and they're not nice about it. They're ferocious.
I mean, first of all, the fact that contemplative practices is entering performance psychology, it's a good sign, because I think that people are starting to wake up to the consequences of that kind of an approach. Second thing is, nothing I said about any of these practices is about being nice or happy.
But self-love is kind of about being happy, right?
It's about wishing. It's not about nice.
No.
And it's
Not
not
being
even
nice to
about
yourself?
it's not even about being happy. It sounds terrible to say this, but the goal is not to contrive more positivity.
Okay.
The goal is to be clear on what the intention is behind what you're doing. And my intention in my life is I wouldn't bust my ass unless I wanted some fulfillment, some sense of joy, some ease. That's why we're doing it. But we forget. We're so in the chase that we forget, wait, why am I doing this? Why am I going to do yet another thing? Oh, I want those things. Keep those in my, balance it out. Bring those back in. Keep them on the whiteboard so that in the pursuit, I don't get lost. I don't get burnt out. I don't harm myself or other people, because you're right. There is always this sort of pendulum of extreme behavior toward ourselves or other people that we interact with. And this becomes very important for leaders too, by the way, even if it's not in the professional athletic context. We got to be aware of that pendulum.
Yeah, that is a real problem with people that are hyperachievers, right? Whether it's in business or whatever. It's like they're so caught up in the goal that their life sucks, even while they're killing it. You know, like how many people that are like business people that are working 16 hours a day or on the verge of a heart attack all the time, and they live in hell, but they're obsessed with numbers. They're obsessed with stock market goals or whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And they're, on paper, very successful. Like, look at him. Look at his beautiful car and his beautiful house and all that. But really, they live in hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're constantly stressed out, and they don't like that life. But they're trapped in this quantifiable contest where they're trying to achieve numbers.
Yeah. And it kind of brings it back to where I was, where I was grinding so much I couldn't feel my teeth. I'm sitting here with I had all the, it's a smaller scale. I'm not a CEO jet setting everywhere, but I had all the things I wanted in my life. I had this awesome job. I'm married to the guy I love, beautiful baby, nice house. I was not there for any of it. And I could feel that. And the fact that maybe it's because I studied attention that I was kind of like becoming aware of it. And then I knew about neuroplasticity. So I'm like, I got to change the brain here. I don't want to change any of this. The external circumstances are great. I need to be in it with the fullness so I can enjoy it. And that's all we're talking about right now. We're talking about a way in which not to not kill it, but not kill yourself in the process or anybody else.
It all sounds great. I like what you're saying.
I like what you're saying. But I think all I wanted to say is, and that's the whole motivation you were asking me at the outset, like, how long did you spend writing this book? And in some sense, like, everything about my life led me to writing this book. Writing it really helped remind me of why I'm striving in the first place. Like, what is it that I want? And going back to this morning, partly the reason I wanted to do that is because my book just launched yesterday. And it's such a momentum. I mean, with any kind of success, there's like, yeah, go, crush it. And I wanted to just take that time and give back to myself of like, you know what? Enjoy it too.
Right.
Be here. Remember what you wish for. This is going to be fun. Like this was fun. But reminding myself of what it's all about, not on my deathbed, but every morning, it's a pretty useful thing to do.
Well, in a lot of ways, I mean, especially what you just said, that it really is most of your life because thinking is constant. It is a part of your life, and attention and focus, it's everywhere. It's the entire life. So this book and you concentrating on attention and trying to give people the tools to help accelerate their attention or focus their attention or utilize their attention more efficiently, that really is life. It's so much of life because it's applicable to basically everything we do.
Absolutely. I mean, really, it sounds like I'm being a little bit grandiose, but what you pay attention to is your life.
Yeah. And people that are really super hyper negative, like they're so exhausting. And the problem is like they'll drag you into their waters with them and drown you in their bullshit, right? That's a real problem because when people are always negative, like, oh my God, man, all you're concentrating on is the wrong shit. Like it's like someone with a poor diet and they get obese and start having heart attacks. Like look, you're concentrating on eating the wrong things. You're concentrating on living the wrong way. Well, you're concentrating on focusing on negative things or external factors that have nothing to do with you, like the jealousy of others, which is a real poison that people consume on a daily basis. The jealousy and hatred towards people they don't even know because they, might see them on television or whatever. Yeah.
That's why actually, and in the context of feeling that, somebody else's dysfunction, what are you going to do in the context of that, right? So, I mean, I see this, I was just, even on my Uber ride to the airport in Miami, the guy got cut off, and the guy that's in the car that cut him off, like, then pulls back to give the guy the finger, and then speeds off again. And I was just really curious, like, terrified. And also, like, how is this driver going to respond? And he's like, you know what? I deal with this all the time. I don't know what his life is that's making him do this, but that's not my life. It's unfortunate that it happened, and I'm just going to keep driving us to the airport. I'm like, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, you got a good one.
But I did. But the thing is, remember back to the loving kindness practice, we don't just practice for ourselves and the people we love and care for. We move it into the neutral. We move it into the difficult person for that exact same reason. Because now when you're interfacing with somebody and you see this and you feel it and you feel them pulling you in, you say, you know what, my true wish for you is not this stuff. You obviously are saying this to yourself privately. It changes your orientation toward the person and the way you're going to engage with them. In some sense, you start having more compassion, like, man, you are so sad or fearful or angry. It's taken you over. That's not what I wish for you. So at least in the way that I interact with this person now, I'm stable and I'm aware of what I'm seeing, and I remind myself of what I want for any other person, and it will change, even if it's subtle, it's going to change the way that I can interact with them so that it's not so defaulting to more bad stuff.
I mean, I think all of it is information, and you get good information from bad examples. You get information about the ways of life that you don't want to live. You get information in the way people interface with their surroundings and other human beings that you don't want to mimic that. And you can learn from other people's mistakes, and that's one of the things that you get from living in cities when you see people hyper stressed, and you see that kind of like constant forced interaction that people have, and how it can manifest itself in some undesirable results. And you can say, "Oh, I don't want to be that guy," and you can learn a little bit from that.
You can learn a little bit from that, but you could also extend kindness in a way that you will probably shift the way things are happening. Now, you're not going to fundamentally change somebody. But I remember,
a little bit, yeah.
I mean, I remember once I was at the airport, and I saw this woman screaming at her kid. Like, she was losing her mind, screaming at this child. It was so obvious, like, you're losing it. And I was like, you know what? I could avoid her or be like, oh God, and I just walked up to her, like not even interfacing with her, but just like kind of wanted to be in her space so that she could realize just by my presence that she's got to kind of take a hold of what she's doing right now, because she's being seen by another person.
Yeah.
And it helped. Like as soon as I kind of entered her space, she's like, kind of like collected herself and kind of started calming down. And I was like, small, it's just a tiny little thing. I was doing it in a very compassionate way. I wasn't to judge her. I didn't go scream at her for screaming at her kid. I just wanted her to nudge her in a way that might remind her of what her purpose is. The kid maybe ran away. I have no idea what happened, but I knew that her reaction was stronger than it needed to be. And I've been there. It's no fun when you overreact to your children. You beat yourself up a lot. So if I could prevent her from having to beat herself up a lot, that probably is going to have a positive cascade in her life and her children's life.
Last question. Do you have an audiobook?
Yes.
Did you read it?
No.
Damn it.
I know.
Why didn't you read it?
See,
you have a
now
great
you
voice.
saying, thank you. I wanted to. I just couldn't figure out how to have a week where I could do that.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Maybe next
Because you're
time
very
around.
busy.
Yeah.
Do you have a copy of it? You can
I
hold
do.
it up?
I
Okay.
do. Yeah.
Grab it. Is it here?
It's over there.
Over there. Go grab it.
Okay.
Grab it so we can hold it up and let everybody know. And it's out today?
It was out yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. So hold, please. We're going to grab it, pull it up so you can have an actual copy of it. Oh, Jamie's got it. Right there. Peak mind. Find your focus. Own your attention. Invest 12 minutes a day. How many pages is it? It's a lot of work to read all this. And it guides you through this.
Yeah, there's a whole 4-week program at the end to help with what you should do for the 12 minutes every day.
All right. It's available now. Ladies and gentlemen, go get it. Even though she didn't read it, you can get the audiobook as well. Available everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I had a great conversation. I
Oh,
really
me
enjoyed
too.
it.
Me too.
It was fun.
It was fun.
And I think it's such an important subject. I think it's just the way you think about things is like it can make just a gigantic impact in the quality and the way your life progresses.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.